Chapter 1657. As he spoke, he waved his other hand gently. The black cage instantly transformed into countless black light spots and scattered in all directions. Chu Ning's body was freed from the cage and suddenly loosened. His body fell to the side uncontrollably. Right at this moment, a gentle force flew over and gently supported his body. Then Chu Ning felt that his whole body was surrounded by this force, which then sent him to the side. He subconsciously wanted to break free, but from the corner of his eye, he happened to see Rong Xiu standing at the side. In an instant he suddenly understood. This should be Rong Xiu's move. Sure enough, with the help of this force, his body quickly reached Rong Xiu's side. Lord Chu Ning. Rong Xiu stretched out his hand and helped him up. Chu Ning looked at this familiar face. Your Highness Prince Li. No, Your Highness's current identity should be the Holy Sun? He didn't know much about Rong Xiu, but he had heard some things. Rong Xiu's lips curved slightly. You, and I are already engaged. You can just call me Rong Xiu. Hearing the two words you, Chu Ning immediately reacted and immediately grabbed Rong Xiu's wrist tightly. Yes, you. Quickly help you. If that thing was really taken away by the black-robed man, then, chi. Suddenly a sharp sound broke through the air. Chu Ning was shocked and hurriedly looked back. When he saw the scene in front of him clearly, a trace of shock and worry flashed across his eyes. This was because the countless black light spots that previously transformed into numerous black light pillars once again rushed toward Chu Liyue's surroundings. In the blink of an eye, it formed an incomparably strong cage, which completely locked Chu Liyue. Chu Ning was shocked and angry at the same time, looking at the black-robed man angrily. You, despicable. The black-robed man laughed in a low voice. You are the owner of this thing. How can I not take you away? He wanted to make this thing completely his. Therefore he had to deal with Shangguanyu as well. Chu Liyue stared fixedly at him, her red lips suddenly forming a cold arc. So you're saying that you've decided not to let me go? This thing has already recognized you as its master. Even if I take it away, it won't listen to me. So what? The black-robed man raised his hand and clenched his fist. The black pillar of light surrounding Chu Liyue instantly emitted an astonishing pressure. The surrounding space began to shrink crazily, squeezing toward her. Chu Liyue felt a tightness in his chest and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Unfortunately, I only know of one way to solve this problem. That is to kill you. Of course, if you know of other ways, it's not a bad idea to share them. Maybe I can spare your life? The black-robed man's tone was high and mighty, as if he could decide Chu Liyue's life and death with just a thought. The qi and blood in Chu Ning's body churned, and he was about to charge forward without a care. Rong Xiu grabbed his arm. Lord Chu Ning, you're in danger. Chu Ning turned around anxiously and was about to say something, but he met Rong Xiu's calm eyes. He was suddenly stunned. He knew how Rong Xiu treated you, however, he didn't seem to be worried at all. Could it be that he still had a trump card? Or did you have other plans? Rong Xiu's thin lips curved slightly. You, will definitely return safely. Don't worry. As his voice fell, the black-robed man laughed mockingly. Ha! What a joke. Shangguanyu, this thing is equivalent to your core of essence. Now that it's separated from you, you're equivalent to a piece of trash with no combat ability. What else do you have to fight me with? These people were too naive. But after hearing his words, Chu Liyue's face did not show any signs of panic. Instead, she even smiled. She raised her hand and slowly wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth. Her eyes were filled with killing intent. She said, You're right. This core of essence is extremely important to any cultivator. Unfortunately, you forgot one thing. Swoosh. A beam of snow-white light flashed in an instant. The red cloud sword appeared in her hand. The blade was sharp and the cold light was biting cold. Now, its owner is still me. Boom. A vast and majestic force suddenly gushed out from the water droplet. The layer of black fog surrounding the water droplet was completely washed away in an instant. The boundless pressure instantly collapsed like a dam, and a torrential flood surged down majestically. The black-robed man sensed that something was wrong. His heart sank and he raised his hand to seal it again. However, just as he moved, the force surged toward him. His body was instantly flung away. How is this possible? When he finally regained control of his body, he immediately looked up at the water droplet with a face full of disbelief. This thing was incomplete. How could it have such shocking power? How is it impossible? Chu Liyue sneered. This thing had been with her for many years, devouring her force day and night. After accumulating for a long time, it had already reached a terrifying level. Even if this black-robed man's strength had reached the level of a god, it would be extremely difficult to control it. She had gone through life and death to finally subdue this thing. Now, someone had suddenly appeared and wanted to snatch it away without a word. How could she agree? Chu Luiyue slowly tightened her grip on the red cloud sword, and the force around her began to surge violently. She said word by word, "I hate it when people snatch my things." Swoosh. The water droplet quickly flew back and rushed into Chu Luiyue's body. Chu Luiyue's aura surged. The next moment she tapped the ground with the tip of her foot and leaped out. She raised the red cloud sword high. The energy of heaven and earth trembled violently and crazily gathered. Red cloud sword. The cold rainbow light tore through the air and instantly slashed toward the black-robed man. Her series of actions were too fast, and the black-robed man couldn't react in time. In a hurry he could only raise his hand to block it. Clang. The red cloud sword landed on his sleeve, and it was as if it had cut black iron, producing an extremely crisp sound of collision. Swoosh. The red cloud sword ruthlessly scratched the sleeve, leaving a pale white mark. At the same time, the man borrowed the force and quickly retreated. He looked down at his sleeves and suddenly smiled sinisterly. "Your red cloud sword is indeed powerful. Last time, my clone suffered a loss because of this. But, do you think I will let you win a second time?" Chu Luiyue's eyes narrowed dangerously. No wonder this man wanted her to come here. Although he didn't have a physical body, this black robe was not ordinary. There weren't many things that could withstand the red cloud sword, but it only left a mark on this black robe. "Since you want to fight with me, then don't blame me for being impolite." The black-robed man crossed his hands in front of him. Boom. In an instant heaven and earth changed color. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1658. Chu Luiyue looked up. Dark clouds were quickly gathering in the sky. Rumbling sounds came from the thick layers of clouds with great momentum. Chu Luiyue's eyes flashed with a hint of sternness. This man did not pause at all. The moment he attacked, he caused the sky to change color and the force to tremble. This showed how powerful he was. You do have some ability to make it recognize you as its master. However, a mere exalted god wants to fight me head-on. I don't know if I should call you naive or stupid. The black-robed man's voice was filled with shocking anger. A cloud of black mist quickly condensed in his palm. The surrounding force of heaven and earth also began to surge crazily. In just a moment, the cloud of black mist condensed into a black palm. This palm was the same size and shape as his hand, but it was condensed by black mist and there seemed to be dark red veins on the surface. It looked very terrifying. Chu Luiyue's pupils shrank. This hand. From the looks of it, it was extremely similar to the hand that was suppressed under the myriad wine mountain. It was just that the one in front of him was much smaller than that, and the aura of suppression was also different. Could it be, were they from the same sect in origin? Or were they cultivating the same type of cultivation technique? Many guesses flashed through Chu Luiyue's mind. Silent scorching palm. The black-robed man shouted in a low voice. The palm began to fly toward Chu Luiyue. Its speed was not fast, but wherever it passed, the surrounding space would silently collapse. Most importantly, as it approached Chu Luiyue, it was still constantly devouring the surrounding energy. The suppression on it became more and more powerful. At the same time, the man waved his sleeves and countless black light spots fell from the sky. Chu Luiyue immediately felt a weight on his body, as if something heavy was pressing down on him. Every movement of his seemed to become difficult and slow. God domain. The god domain of a venerable god was indeed incomparable to an exalted god. Chu Luiyue just stood there and felt as if his body was about to explode. She wanted to wave Scarlet Heaven Sword, but found that she could not even do a simple action like raising the sword in the opponent's god domain. A venerable god artifact is indeed a good treasure. Unfortunately, your realm is too far away from mine. In the face of absolute power, any auxiliary power would become meaningless. Chu Luiyue was trapped in the same place, and the black palm was getting closer and closer. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth again. Every part of her body seemed to have been ruthlessly crushed by something. The intense pain caused her face quickly turn pale, and her body as if she would collapse at any moment. Her hands that were holding the sword began to tremble. Chu Ning, who was standing in the distance, saw this scene and his heart almost stopped beating. If it weren't for Rong Xiu taking care of him, he would have died by now. Chu Ning suddenly thought of something and looked at Rong Xiu. At this time, Rong Xiu, was he still not going to make a move? Rong Xiu was also watching the battle with a focused expression. However, there was no shock or anxiety in his eyes. It was as if he was waiting for something. That black palm was already right in front of Chu Luiyue and was about to land on her body. At this moment, Scarlet Heaven Sword in her hand finally moved. Endless elemental power gushed out from the water droplet and spread to her limbs and bones. Chu Luiyue's aura rose again. She swung her sword. Swish! The sharp and bright blade slashed down from the middle of the black palm. One hand was instantly cut into two halves. However, seeing this scene, Chu Luiyue suddenly felt uneasy. Sure enough, in the next moment, the two halves of the palm actually condensed once more, and they formed two identical hands. The most terrifying thing was that the power and aura on it did not seem to be reduced at all. Chu Luiyue's heart sank. Then the two hands flanked Chu Luiyue from the left and right. The feeling of being restrained returned once again. This silent burning palm can devour all the attacking power. Unless you are also a venerable god expert and can break it, otherwise, as long as you continue to attack, it will only continue to become stronger. The black-robed man laughed sinisterly. In this case, do you still want to continue? The more she resisted, the worse the result. Chu Luiyue stared at the two palms in front of her as countless thoughts flashed through her mind. She did not doubt the truth of the other party's words. His realm and strength were indeed much higher than hers. As a venerable god, forcefully fighting against a venerable god expert was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. It seemed that she had to think of another way. Chu Luiyue's mind raced, and then she directly stabbed Scarlet Heaven Sword into the ground. Since she couldn't beat him, wouldn't it be fine if she didn't fight? Her sudden action stunned the black-robed man for a moment. Was she going to admit defeat? It didn't seem to be. Clang. Chu Luiyue took out a black shield and placed it in front of her. The black shield looked very shabby and unremarkable. However, the moment he saw the black shield, the black-robed man's hands in his sleeves instantly tightened. Chu Luiyue did not notice this. After placing the shield in front of her, she simply sat down cross-legged. She took a deep look at the black-robed man opposite her, and then slowly closed her eyes. She raised her hands slightly, and several streams of light instantly appeared. Shen formation? At this moment, the black-robed man finally realized what Chu Luiyue was trying to do. The strength of a martial artist could not fight against him, so she wanted to use a Shen formation? After understanding Chu Luiyue's plan, the black-robed man's first reaction was to laugh. Did she think that she had the confidence to turn the tables? A Xian master could indeed display power that exceeded his own strength, but there was a limit to it. Moreover, if she wanted to display such a level, she would have to construct an extremely complicated Xian formation. At this moment, Chu Luiyue did not have the time. What? Just as this thought flashed through his mind, he saw that a palm-sized Xian formation had already appeared in front of Chu Luiyue. Although the Xian formation was small, the pressure on it was not to be underestimated. Once it was used, its power would definitely be extraordinary. A trace of shock flashed through the black-robed man's heart. How could she be so fast? Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1659. At this moment, his two black palms had already closed in on Chu Luiyue and were about to succeed. However, when they were a step away from Chu Luiyue, they suddenly stopped and were unable to take another step forward. It was as if there was something terrifying in front of them that made them fearful. The black shield stood silently in front of Chu Luiyue. At a glance, there was nothing special about it. However, the two black palms finally stopped and refused to move forward. The black-robed man seemed to have expected this as he gritted his teeth and said, "I actually forgot that you still have this trump card." His voice was cold and resentful. Chu Luiyue closed her eyes and was still constructing the Xian formation in front of her as if she didn't hear it. Or maybe she heard it but she didn't care. Since the battle at Myriad Wine Mountain, she knew that compared to Crimson Heaven Sword, this black shield was the true trump card of her trump cards. When she faced such a terrifying attack at that time, she relied on this black shield to survive, let alone now. This black-robed man was strong, but he wasn't so strong that he was invincible. Even if she couldn't defeat him, it wasn't that difficult for her to survive. Under the protection of the black shield, this battle that didn't have any suspense came to a halt. The scene seemed to be frozen, allowing time to flow slowly. Only the Xian formation in front of Chu Luiyue was expanding and becoming more and more complicated. Let's see how long you can hide. She could temporarily hide behind the black shield and buy some time for herself. However, she couldn't be like this forever. As for the Xian formation, he didn't think that Chu Luiyue had the ability to do so. Both parties were in a stalemate. Chu Ning's gaze swept across the few of them as he frowned. He roughly saw the current situation, but he still felt that there were many things that were very strange. Why did the black-robed man want to snatch Yu's pill of origin? Yu wanted to use the Shin formation to fight with the opponent, but he didn't know if it would work. Furthermore, the black-robed man didn't even look at them from the beginning to the end. He didn't make a move against Rongxiu, and Rongxiu also watched from the side and didn't make a move. What exactly was going on with them? Unable to figure it out, Chuning gave up. He clenched his fists and prayed in his heart. You must come back safe and sound. Nan Yuxing and the others finally slowed down after making sure that no one was chasing after them. There were 4 of them in total. Nan Yuxing and Elder Bai Tong were heavily injured, while Nan Yi was lightly injured. Only Elder Wu Peng's situation was slightly better. However, losing a King Divine artifact that he had personally refined was not a small blow to him. The few of them found a place to rest, and only then did they carefully treat their injuries. Nan Yuxing was still fine. They hadn't fought head-on. His anger had attacked his heart, causing his internal injuries to worsen. However, it was still within a manageable range. Elder Bai Tong's situation was the worst. A section of his calf was cut off. Even though he was a celestial physician, the only thing he could do now was to stop the bleeding and heal his wounds. That section of his calf had been completely crushed, and he didn't even have the chance to sew it back together. This would have a huge impact on any cultivator. They were all silent and the atmosphere was cold and stifling. After a long while, Nanny finally couldn't help but ask, "That man, who is he? When did such a person appear in the god-slaying mound?" His strength was unbelievably strong and he even said that it was his territory. At first, they thought that he was just saying it casually. However, what happened later made them suspicious. He doesn't look like he's from the outside world. However, in the battle tens of thousands of years ago, all the god-level experts were killed and their souls destroyed. Moreover, the energy here is violent. Ordinary people can't stay here for more than a year. Otherwise, it's very easy for them to die because they can't withstand the violent energy here. Nan Yuxing frowned and muttered to himself. Elder Wu Peng suddenly said, "He's not a normal person. He's just a soul. That's why he's so strong. Isn't that even more suspicious?" Nan Yuxing rubbed his forehead. Ordinary cultivators without a physical body would have their strength greatly reduced. However, that wasn't the case for that black-robed man. There's also that Rongxiu. I've heard some rumors about him before, but I didn't pay much attention to him. Now that I've seen him today, I know that his strength has reached such a level. At the mention of this, Nan Yuxing couldn't help but clench his teeth. Resentment, jealousy, unwillingness. He had always prided himself on being outstanding, but today he was dim in front of that man. How could he feel good? Elder Wu Peng said in a deep voice. "This Rongxiu is hiding his strength. When we go back, we must investigate him carefully. Also, Patriarch." Rongxiu recognized them immediately. It was obvious that he knew them well. He even called out Nan Yifan's name in such a casual tone. This was another hidden concern in Elder Wu Peng's heart. They were all silent for a moment. If Rongxiu wasn't bluffing, then, "Look, something seems wrong over there." Nanny looked back and suddenly exclaimed. They all looked over. The sky in the distance had unknowingly become gloomy. There seemed to be lightning flashing vaguely. "They're fighting?" Nan Yuxing suddenly realized something and sneered. "No matter how powerful they are, they're definitely not that man's match. This time, I'm afraid they're all going to die in that man's hands." Wind, clouds, and thunder. The energy of heaven and earth kept surging. Chu Liyue's hair was lifted by the wind. The oppressive feeling around her seemed to have become stronger. Chu Liyue frowned slightly. Although the black shield could help her block most of the attacks, it couldn't completely isolate all the power. The black-robed man's god domain was indeed too terrifying. If this continued, she was afraid that before she could cast the Shen formation, she would clatter. A stone suddenly fell out of Chu Liyue's universe ring. The black-robed man was stunned when he saw this scene. Why did a stone suddenly appear? Clatter. Immediately after, the second stone fell. Then more and more stones appeared. Digression. I'm going out to do something today, so I might be late when I get home, so I won't let everyone wait. I'll update it tomorrow. Chapter 1660. Soon the ground around Chu Liyue was littered with stones. It was messy and did not seem to follow any rules. The black-robed man was even more confused. Why did so many stones suddenly appear out of nowhere? Could it be that Shangguan Yu needs the power of these stones to set up a Shen formation? But these ugly stones are ordinary. What's so good about them? However, for some reason they look familiar. Splash, the faint sound of waves was suddenly heard. The sound was very soft. If one did not listen carefully, they would not be able to hear it clearly. However, the surroundings were very quiet at this moment, and the black-robed man's attention was focused on Chu Luiyue, so he happened to hear this sound. Just as he was puzzled, a blue stream of light suddenly surged out from one of the stones. The originally powerful pressure that was almost suffocating seemed to have been torn open by this blue stream of light. The black-robed man finally realized something. This is a god domain? There was a hint of disbelief in his voice. It was not only because of the god domain that suddenly flowed out of the stones, but also because he finally remembered why these stones looked so familiar. Aren't these the broken tombstones from the tomb of the exalted gods? Why did these things suddenly appear in Shangguanyu? The black-robed man had a bad feeling. He vaguely felt that he seemed to have overlooked something important. While he was in shock and hesitating, more and more god domains surged out from the stones. These god domains were scattered, and almost every one of them was very small and weak. However, many little drops made an ocean. At this point, there were at least hundreds of stones scattered around Chu Luiyue. Together, there were hundreds of god domains. Most importantly, these god domains seemed to have some kind of tacit understanding with each other. With Chu Luiyue as the center, they surrounded her and surged silently, tearing holes in the invisible pressure. Silently, Chu Luiyue was already completely surrounded and protected by these god territories. The pressure around her suddenly decreased, causing Chu Luiyue to open her eyes in shock. When she saw the rocks and the divine territory around her, she was shocked. This was because she had been thinking about how to complete the Xian formation as soon as possible to defend against the black-robed man's attack. He didn't expect that these stones would come out of the interspatial ring by themselves. And he's even taking the initiative to protect me? Chu Luiyue blinked and thought for a moment. She didn't even have time to summon her divine realm before. Then she lifted her gaze and looked at the black-robed man again. Even though she couldn't see his face, she could keenly sense that his aura had become even more ferocious and dangerous. Seeing this scene, his mood probably wouldn't be too good. Thinking of this, Chu Luiyue's lips curved up. With this huge help, her chances of winning were even higher. You actually took all of these for yourself? The black-robed man suddenly raised his hand and pointed at Chu Luiyue. Shangguanyu, how dare you? Because of his agitation, his voice became a little sharp, but he quickly suppressed it as if he was worried about something. Chu Luiyue raised her eyebrows slightly. Thank you for the compliment. You've known me for a long time. Do you only know who I am now? Actually, she didn't take these stones on her own accord, but they insisted on following her. She had no choice but to keep them in her interspatial ring. She didn't care much at first, but now, these stones seemed to be quite useful. The black-robed man was so angry that his hand that was pointing at Chu Luiyue trembled slightly. You. However, after holding it in for a long time, he couldn't think of any rebuttal. Of course, he knew what these stones were, and that was why he was so shocked. Weren't they living well in my place? They had been living like this for tens of thousands of years. No matter how the weather changed, they remained indifferent and only maintained the same state. Why did they suddenly change when they met Shangguanyu? He couldn't figure it out. At the same time, he felt a little worried for the first time. Such a shocking change was definitely not a small matter. Moreover, with their help, it wouldn't be that easy to kill Shangguanyu again. He began to try to increase the pressure of his deity domain in an attempt to attack Chu Luiyue again. However, hundreds of deity domains had already formed an extremely strong protective net around Chu Luiyue. If he wanted to deal with Chu Luiyue again, he would have to think of other ways. The black-robed man fell into a long silence as he looked at the countless deity domains floating in the air. Are those deity domains? Chu Ning frowned slightly and asked softly. Rong Xiao nodded slightly. We accidentally bumped into these yesterday. They seem to be fated with you. You couldn't resist and brought them along. I didn't expect them to be so useful at such a crucial time. Chu Ning didn't say anything. Rong Xiao looked around and saw that Chu Ning was still staring at the deity domains. He thought that Chu Ning was still worried about Chu Luiyue, so he said, Don't worry. Don't worry. Although the individual might of these god territories isn't extremely strong, when gathered together, they can still unleash a great effect. Moreover, has her own deity domain, so she has her own deity domain? Yes. Just happened to break through to the high god realm some time ago. Due to the special circumstances, Rong Xiao didn't explain in detail. Er's deity domain didn't appear during this breakthrough. She already had it a few years ago. It was just that she suppressed her deity domain in Mount Pengmin during this period of time. So this is a deity domain. Chu Ning seemed to have understood something, and a look of realization appeared on his face. He lowered his eyes and looked at his hands. They were blood-stained and full of injuries. However, his eyes seemed to be looking at something else through his hands. Rong Xiao felt that something was strange when he noticed Chu Ning's silence. "Lord Chu Ning, what's wrong?" Chu Ning retracted his gaze and shook his head. "Nothing. I just feel that you, has changed a lot after we parted." What was her cultivation level when we parted last time? Now she had grown to her current level. Rong Xiao was about to speak when he heard Chu Ning's voice suddenly lower. "She must have suffered a lot, right?" He asked carefully, but there was an unconcealable sadness and heartache in his voice. Rong Xiao's words were suddenly stuck in his throat. He looked at Chu Ning with a slightly deep gaze. Everyone could see that she was shining brightly. Only those who truly loved her could see her hardships and difficulties. After a long while, Rong Xiao slowly tightened his hands in his sleeves and said, "Don't worry. I'm here. I'll make sure that she's safe and happy." Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1661. The Xian formation in front of Chu Luiyue was gradually being completed. A terrifying aura was being emitted from the formation. At the same time, dark clouds were gathering in the sky, and the wind and thunder were howling. The uneasiness in the black-robed man's heart grew stronger. When he made his move just now, he had caused a phenomenon in heaven and earth. However, when Chu Luiyue's Xian formation was completed, he was shocked to realize that her ability to summon the energy of heaven and earth seemed to be slightly better than his. This made his already anxious heart feel even more uncomfortable. "I can't let this go on." He had spent a lot of effort to lure Shangguanyu here. If he couldn't take her down today, it would be difficult for him to find such an opportunity in the future. Furthermore, this woman's strength had always been increasing at an unimaginable rate. In the beginning he didn't take her seriously at all. However, as the days passed, she was now able to make him feel threatened. If he delayed any longer, perhaps one day Shangguanyu would surpass him. Who knows? When that time came, wouldn't all his years of planning go to waste? When he thought of this, he finally made up his mind and raised his hand. He didn't have a physical body. Instead, he was a translucent soul in his black robe. At this moment, he stretched out his hands and a black fog appeared. The strange black fog lingered around his hands and then quietly dissipated. However, when his hands reappeared, they were different from before. They were thinner and even looked like skeletons. They carried an unconcealable evil aura. Swoosh! A dark light flashed past his palms. Suddenly, a black wooden stick appeared. The wooden stick was about the thickness of an adult's arm. It was dark in color and its surface was rough with many scratches. However, the top of the wooden stick was very round and seemed to be engraved with red veins. However, the color was extremely dim and didn't stand out when compared to the black color. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't notice it. However, the black wooden stick had a very good texture and seemed to be quite heavy. The black-robed man slowly clenched his fists. The energy of heaven and earth in the surroundings suddenly surged towards him. Then all of it poured into the wooden stick. In an instant, smoke and dust filled the air. Noticing the commotion, Chu Luiyue quickly looked up to take a look. Her gaze lingered on the black wooden stick for a moment. With just one glance, her heart suddenly trembled. "This thing, I'm afraid, is not simple." She held her breath and concentrated, speeding up the drawing of the profound formation in front of her. A strange blood-red rune suddenly appeared on the black wooden stick. The appearance of this rune seemed to have opened a layer of restriction, causing the black wooden stick's aura to rise once more. The first layer of the brilliant heaven staff. Wave Breaker. He gripped the black wooden stick tightly with both hands, raised it high, and then slammed it down hard. Boom. The black wooden stick landed heavily on the ground, exploding with an earth-shattering boom. Crack. A gully instantly appeared on the ground. A tyrannical and violent power swept out. The ravine also began to extend towards Chu Luiyue at an astonishing speed. Everywhere it passed, space was unable to endure this sudden and terrifying force, and it collapsed soundlessly. In the blink of an eye, he was already in front of Chu Luiyue. Crush. The energy of heaven and earth around Chu Luiyue was greatly affected by this attack, and it began to spread wildly to the side. The countless divine domains around her were also gradually surging up and down like waves. The black-robed man stared at the scene in front of him. The brilliant sky staff was his trump card and it was extremely powerful. However, every time he used it, he would expend a lot of energy and it would take him at least 3 months to recover. Therefore he rarely used it. Originally, he did not want to use it today. After all, it was not difficult for him to deal with Shangguanyu. However, he did not expect her to have so many trump cards. Furthermore, she had even taken those stones that contained divine domains for her own use. Helpless, he could only do this. As long as he could end the battle quickly, everything else could be temporarily put aside. The brilliant sky staff had a total of 3 layers of power. Each layer was stronger than the previous one, but the impact on him was also greater. However, even the first layer was enough to deal with her. Crush. The sound of the surging waves became clearer and clearer in his ears. Chu Liyue could even see that the divine domains around her were also greatly affected, and they were on the verge of collapse. It was as if they would be destroyed by that terrifying power at any time. The surrounding environment was unstable, and she could not continue to focus on the Shen formation. But she was so close. Chu Liyue frowned slightly. Then she suddenly thought of something and had a thought. Whoosh, countless stones rolled out from the universe ring, and in a short while they covered her body. Several divine realms rushed out of these stones and merged with the previous ones. Very soon, the divine realm that was still on the verge of collapse became stable again. As for that energy, it was finally completely blocked outside and was unable to move forward in the slightest. How is this possible? The black-robed man was shocked by the scene in front of him. Just now he had made up his mind to finish off Shang Guanyu, and he did not hold back at all. How is she so strong? No, that's not right. To be more precise, she had too many stones on her. Did she empty the tombs of the exalted gods? Chu Liyue's lips curled into a smile. Looks like this move of yours is only SOSO. Wave breaking. If it was a huge wave, it would not be so easy for him to break it. Boom. The two forces collided fiercely, but Chu Liyue's divine domain did not fluctuate at all. On the contrary, the black-robed man's strike was quickly collapsing. Looking at the scene before him, the black-robed man was first shocked, then he trembled with anger. She actually withstood that strike. She did not even make a move from the beginning to the end. She only threw some stones. Are you crazy? In a moment of desperation, the black-robed man could no longer hold back and shouted at the stones. How dare you help her like this? Have you all forgotten who you are? This shout was obviously directed at the rocks. Although the scene looked very strange, Chu Liyue, who had dealt with these stones before, knew that they could understand human language. However, no matter how angry he was, no matter how loud he screamed, the rocks remained indifferent. There was no reaction at all. The black-robed man was furious. Are you all trying to rebel? No matter what, these stones came from the tombs of the exalted gods. However, this was the tombs of the exalted gods. And he was indeed an exalted god powerhouse. Chu Liyue's lips curled up slightly. Looks like they don't want to bother with you. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1662. I can't let this go on, the black-robed man thought to himself. He had already sensed that the Xian formation in Shangguanyu was not simple. With the help of these stones, I'm afraid. He no longer hesitated and made a prompt decision. He held the brilliant sky staff tightly. The energy in the surroundings surged again. This time, the commotion was obviously bigger than the previous one. Then, a second strange rune appeared on the black wooden staff. The blood-red totem at the top of the wooden staff also became clearer. Second stage of the brilliant sky staff, Mountain Seal. The black-robed man's sleeves fluttered, and the aura around him surged wildly. The second strike landed fiercely. Boom. A ray of black light suddenly flew out from the wooden staff and rapidly transformed into numerous black vines that were as thick as a thumb. These vines intertwined with each other, and in the blink of an eye, they formed a huge dome that trapped Chu Liyue within. Chu Liyue's surrounding god domain was once again shaken by this force and started shaking. She felt a tightness in her chest, and a strong smell of blood spread from her mouth. She forced herself to swallow it and continued to draw the last few strokes on the Xian formation. The god territory's energy fluctuated more violently, and it seemed to be on the verge of collapse. The black-robed man sneered. With the help of these god territories, Shangguanyu was indeed difficult to deal with. However, whether it was her or these god territories, they were only high gods. If they wanted to defeat him, it was still too early. Die. The black-robed man shouted. Countless vines instantly tightened. Some of the god territories around Chu Liyue were unable to withstand the erosion of this force and began to shatter. However, at this moment, a reddish-gold ray of light suddenly flashed. Then, a little girl who looked no older than 3 or 4 years old appeared in front of Chu Liyue. She was wearing a reddish-gold lotus leaf dress, and her hair was tied up in 2 buns with a red string and a golden bell. She looked very cute. especially her pair of black grape-like eyes, which were clear and pure. However, at this moment, his eyes were burning with raging flames of fury. She pointed at the black-robed man, and her face was filled with anger. "You want to bully Ayu? You're courting death." The sudden appearance of Dumpling caused the atmosphere to become strange. The black-robed man looked at the little girl who suddenly appeared and almost laughed out loud. "What's the matter? Shangguanyu, you can't beat him, so you even called out your children to fight? Isn't that a little too?" Suddenly his laughter stopped. Oh. The space around Chu Luiyue had already been sealed by his brilliant sky rod. The people outside could not enter and the people inside could not come out. How did this little girl suddenly appear there? Furthermore, when she appeared, there didn't seem to be any energy fluctuations around her. How could such a child do all this? He stared at Dumpling and was suddenly startled. Wait a minute. When she appeared, there seemed to be a flash of golden light. Could it be Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenix? He almost couldn't believe his eyes as he shouted out these words. He knew that Shangguanyu had a contracted divine beast called the Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenix. When he suddenly saw this little girl, he didn't think of that. However, everything in front of him kept proving his guess. Before he could react, Dumpling had already moved and went directly to the surrounding intertwined black vines. With a wave of her small hand, the golden flame flew out instantly. It landed on the black vines and began to burn violently. The black-robed man's heart sank. It was indeed the Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenix. However, if the Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenix wanted to transform into a human, it should at least look like a teenager. However, this little girl looked to be only 3 or 4 years old. How did she do it? Moreover, why hadn't he heard of this before? Countless questions flashed through his mind, but he didn't have much time now. Because, under the burning of the reddish-gold flames, the layer of black vines was gradually burned to nothing. Moreover, the fire seemed to be spreading. How is this possible? The black-robed man was shocked when he saw this scene. The brilliant sky rod was his trump card and was extremely powerful. Ordinary flames couldn't do anything to it. Even the flames of the Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenix could barely resist it. How could there be such a one-sided situation? However, he didn't know that Dumpling's flames were different from ordinary Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenixes. She had the purest bloodline and inherited the power of the ancestor of the clan. Back then, that ancestor was born in the chaos and was a supreme existence in the world. How could it be a problem to deal with him? While he was in a daze, Dumpling had already dashed to the front of those black vines. Her little face was filled with anger. She actually reached out her chubby little hand and grabbed at the black vines. Arrogant. When the black-robed man saw this, he was so angry that he laughed mockingly. This Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenix was indeed quite capable, but unfortunately she was too impulsive and brainless. The black vines were covered with sharp thorns. Even if a high god powerhouse tried to grab it forcefully, he would only end up being stabbed. Needless to say, there was poison on it. What? His smug smile froze on his face before it could fully spread out. Tuanzi directly grabbed the rattan in front of her and pulled it hard. The huge vines were pulled down by her just like that. This time, even the entire cage made of black rattan vines began to tremble, on the verge of collapsing. At the same time, the flames in Dumpling's palms surged and burned the cage to ashes. She didn't even give the black-robed man any time to react. By the time he realized what was happening, the entire semicircular cage made of black vines had been destroyed by Dumpling. On the other hand, there wasn't even a scratch on Dumpling's chubby little hand. Dumpling kept pulling, venting all her anger on the black vines. The originally sturdy cage was torn apart by her just like that. Ignoring the gazes of others, Dumpling gritted her teeth and quickly pulled the black vines together. Then she waved a ball of fire. Boom. The fire soared into the sky and burned completely. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1663. There was dead silence. The crackling sound of the burning vines was exceptionally clear. The black-robed man took a step back weakly. He held the brilliant sky rod in one hand and placed his other hand on his chest. He bent down slightly as if he was experiencing some kind of pain. He had used almost all of his strength to execute this attack. Now that they were burned by Tuanzi in such a way, the countercharge he suffered was extremely shocking. How could he bear it? After this incident, he would definitely not be able to recover without half a year of recuperation. Good. He gritted his teeth and his voice seemed to be squeezed out from the gaps of his teeth. He did not hide his deep resentment and anger. What a good Shangguan Yu. I really underestimated you. He thought that by inviting her here, he would be able to use all of his strength to deal with her easily. But he never expected Shangguan Yu to be such an iron plate. Not only did her strength increase since the last time they met, she even had more trump cards. This kind of luck was really heaven-defying. If this dragged on, it was really hard to tell who would win or lose. Chu Luiwei ignored him and only stared at the Shen formation in front of her. Dumpling stood in front of her and placed her hands on her waist. You've schemed against our Ayu several times, right? This time, you even used Grandpa Chu as a hostage to force Ayu to come here. What venerable god expert, I think you're just a despicable and shameless coward. You've done so many things but you don't even dare to show your true face. Oh right, I almost forgot, you don't even have a face. You want to bully our Ayu? Have you asked for my permission? Dumpling's mouth was like a cannon as she continuously scolded the black-robed man. The black-robed man felt his blood boiling when he heard these words. He wanted to kill her immediately and shut her up forever. What about you? You can't even defeat me and you want to deal with Ayu? You don't even know if you're worthy. You're not convinced? Come on. The black-robed man was so angry that he couldn't say a word. He had lived for so long, but he had never been scolded by a little girl who was still wet behind the ears like this. Chuning was dumbfounded. This little girl is... Rong Xiu's lips curved up slightly. This is Er's contracted magical beast, the scarlet gold heavenly phoenix, which is the one that used to follow by her side. You can call her Dumpling. The previous one didn't look like this. Moreover, how did this contracted magical beast become so powerful? Chuning felt that everything she had experienced today was too surreal. Even though he had seen it with his own eyes, he still found it unbelievable. He had just seen how powerful that black-robed man was. However, this Dumpling had actually countered his attack so easily. Moreover, Dumpling didn't look very old, but she had a glib tongue. This Dumpling is extremely smart and powerful. Chuning thought for a long time and could only use this euphemism to express it. Rong Xiu's smile deepened. She was brought out by so she's naturally different. The black-robed man was already in a state of madness. He had attacked twice in a row, but he didn't even touch Shangguan Yu's body. If this were to spread out, who knew how many people would laugh their heads off? Good. Since you're so arrogant, take my third attack. He suddenly let go of the brilliant sky staff and crossed his hands in front of him. The third level of the brilliant sky staff, Return to Heaven. On the black wooden staff, the third rune slowly appeared. Digression. After running around the whole day yesterday when I was writing at night, I fell asleep again. When I woke up, it was already 3 o'clock in the morning. I could only write so much at noon and wait until I get home at night. Because I still have to make up for it, it will be around 9 o'clock. Love mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience from LoveNet. Chapter 1664. The sky suddenly darkened. More and more dark clouds gathered, piling up together gloomily. No light could be seen. It was clearly noon, but at this moment, darkness had descended like dusk. Everything in the surroundings was shrouded in a thick layer of shadow. The wind stopped blowing. The wilderness became more and more silent. However, such silence made people feel inexplicably uneasy. The black-robed man suddenly held the brilliant heaven rod with both hands and pointed it to the sky. Go! This voice was distant and boundless, and it reverberated majestically between heaven and earth. Suddenly, the third rune on the brilliant heaven rod suddenly erupted with a blood-colored light beam. It soared to the sky. Swoosh! The void shook. The surrounding energy of heaven and earth was affected, and it also began to shake crazily. The blood-colored light beam shot straight to the sky, and it directly tore a hole in the thick and heavy cloud layer. It was like a stone falling into a calm lake, instantly creating ripples. Above the sky, dark clouds surged, layer upon layer. A blood-colored hole appeared in the black cloud layer. With this as the center, the blood-colored light on the brilliant heaven rod also spread silently to the surroundings. Soon, half of the sky was actually dyed with a layer of shocking blood color. Black and red, these two extreme colors intertwined with each other. Dense killing intent gradually spread, and it crushed towards the ground, almost suffocating people. At this moment, time seemed to pass exceptionally slowly. The blood-colored light beam gushed out from the brilliant heaven rod, and it connected with the sky. Between the dark heaven and earth, this blood-colored light was exceptionally conspicuous. The power above was constantly surging, causing the blood-colored light in the sky to gradually spread out, and the range became wider and wider. Unknowingly, it had already covered a large area of the sky. Chu Luiyue and the rest were quietly included in the range of this blood-colored light. Rong Xiu raised his head and looked, and his deep phoenix eyes narrowed dangerously. It seemed that this time he really intended to take that thing away from you, or at all costs. To use this move he was practically risking his life. There seemed to be waves surging in his eyes, and a thick black gold color flashed past. He gently closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they had already regained their calmness. Chu Ning stood beside Rong Xiu, her heart in her throat. He clenched his fists tightly and did not even feel his wounds open. His eyes were fixed on Chu Luiyue, who was not far away. You must be safe. This time, the commotion was huge and everyone within 100 miles could see it clearly. Nan Yuxing and his group were no exception. They had been paying close attention to the situation over there, and when they saw the blood-red pillar of light soaring into the sky, they couldn't hide their excitement. What's that? Nanny frowned, her face filled with curiosity and nervousness. Even from such a distance, she could still sense the terrifying pressure and baleful aura from the blood-red pillar of light. She placed one hand over her heart. The full-powered attack of a venerable god is indeed not to be underestimated. It seems that the black-robed man has made his move. Nan Yuxing narrowed his eyes, his heart filled with lingering fear and delight. The lingering fear was that the black-robed man was indeed very strong. Even if they were not injured, they might not be his match if they joined forces. The delight was that the first to bear the brunt of the attack was undoubtedly Rong Xiu and his group. He has already made up his mind to take their lives, so of course he won't show mercy. Elder Wu Peng's voice was low, and his brows were slightly furrowed as if he was thinking about something. But what? Nan Yuxing asked subconsciously. Elder Wu Peng paused. But, until now, I still haven't figured it out. He said that place is his territory. What does this mean? Nan Yuxing was stunned for a moment. The sentence, isn't it the literal meaning? Could it be that there are other meanings? Elder Wu Peng fell into silence. Nan Yuxing and his group were still young and did not know much about the god-slaying tomb, but he had heard many rumors about it. Since the shocking battle tens of thousands of years ago, countless god-level experts had fallen in the god-slaying tomb. After a long time, the place was filled with a dense killing intent that had never dissipated. Even a powerful cultivator would have to be extremely careful when entering this place. But he had never heard of anyone who dared to say that the god-slaying tomb was his territory. Even if it was only a small area. One must know that the tomb was full of former top experts. Especially the place where they were just now, which was the tomb of a god-level expert. Just by stepping on it, they might be able to step on the corpse of a god-level expert. And that black-robed man. It seemed that he was not lying. I feel that the aura of that person is somewhat familiar. Elder Bai Tong, who had been silent for a long time, finally recovered some strength and spoke. Everyone turned to look at him. Elder Wu Peng frowned. Familiar? You recognized his identity? Elder Bai Tong shook his head. Because of his broken leg, he could only support himself with a crutch. His face was pale and there was no color on his lips. He looked very haggard. Even his voice had become much weaker. He paused and glanced at Elder Wu Peng with a complicated expression. Don't you feel that the aura of that man is somewhat similar to the people of the Black Demon Cave? Black Demon Cave? Elder Wu Peng and the others were stunned. Didn't they go into seclusion a few years ago? Nan Yuxing frowned. The Nan family had no contact with the Black Demon Cave, not to mention after the Black Demon Cave went into seclusion. If Elder Bai Tong had not suddenly mentioned it, Nan Yuxing would not have remembered this name. They have always been arrogant and unbridled, and I heard that everyone in the sect is vicious and merciless. Although I haven't heard much about them in the past few years, those people from the Black Demon Cave are not easy to deal with. Elder Wu Peng was very experienced and had seen many storms. Although he had never confronted the Black Demon Cave head-on, he had heard many rumors about them in the past few years. He did not know what had triggered them in the past few years, but they had suddenly disappeared from the Divine Ruins world. That's not important now. What's important is that man does seem to be from the Black Demon Cave. Elder Wu Peng fell into deep thought. Then why would he appear here? No matter what his identity is, it's fine as long as he can take care of those people. Nan Yuxing waved his hand and said impatiently. They had suffered at the hands of Rong Xiu and Nanny, so they naturally wanted to get back at them. Although it was a pity that he could not do it himself, it was also good to be able to take care of them directly. Nanny pursed her lips when she heard this as if she wanted to say something. Nan Yuxing's gaze turned slightly. How could he not guess what she was thinking when he saw her expression? His expression became colder and colder. Are you still thinking about that Rong Xiu? Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1665. Nanny came back to her senses and her body trembled slightly. She suddenly looked up at him. Being scrutinized by those stern eyes, she subconsciously looked away. How can that be? They injured us to such an extent, how can I still be thinking about this? Big brother, although I'm usually stubborn and mischievous, I'm not someone who doesn't know what's good for me. Nan Yuxing stared at her for a long time. His gaze was as sharp as a blade, as if he wanted to cut her open and see everything. He only retracted his oppressive gaze when Nanny almost couldn't take it anymore. It's good that you know. He is now the enemy of our Nan family. Do you still have any thoughts about him? Nanny clenched her hands tightly. I won't. Only then did Nan Yuxing relax. That's good. After today they probably won't be able to walk out of the god-slaying tomb alive. What's the point of thinking about that? The most important thing now is to help you find that thing as soon as possible. At the mention of this, their expressions changed slightly. Ever since they came to the god-slaying tomb, too many things had happened, so much so that they almost forgot this most important task. Eldest young master is right. No matter what's going on over there, it has nothing to do with us. It's just death. Finding that thing as soon as possible is the most important thing. Elder Wu Peng took out a palm-sized bronze octagonal compass as he spoke. On top of it, a transparent needle was vibrating slightly. Wu Peng, are we going to use the star catcher compass now? Elder Bai Tong was taken aback and hesitated. This thing was extremely precious and could quickly determine the location of that thing. However, every time the star catcher compass was used, it would cost the holder 3 months of his lifespan. Before they came, they had said that they would try their best not to use it. But now, Elder Wu Peng took it out just like that. Elder Wu Peng shook his head. The god-slaying tomb is extremely dangerous and full of variables. From the looks of it, we'd better end the battle quickly and find that thing to leave this place as soon as possible. All 4 of them were injured, and 2 of them were seriously injured and almost couldn't fight anymore. If they didn't use it now, when would they use it? Yes. This place is very strange and dangerous. If we continue to stay here, we don't know what kind of trouble we will encounter. Nanny's eyes lit up when she heard that she could leave. Can we go now? This is great. She didn't want to come to the god-slaying mound from the beginning, but her father insisted that she come. He even asked her brother and 2 elders to accompany her. Unable to dissuade him, she could only agree. He originally thought that he was just going through the motions, but who knew that it was actually so dangerous? What she had suffered in the past 2 days was more than what she had suffered in the past 10 years. Now that she could finally leave as soon as possible, of course she was happy. Elder Wu Peng reminded him. Second miss, we still have to find that thing before we can leave. Nanny hurriedly nodded. I know. However, as long as he used the star catcher plate, wouldn't he be able to find it very quickly? From the looks of it, Elder Wu Peng did not seem to realize that doing so would deplete Elder Wu Peng's lifespan. Of course, it was also possible that he didn't care at all. Nan Yuxing's brows twitched. He didn't say anything, but his expression showed that he agreed with Nanny. They really didn't want to stay here any longer. Elder Bai Tong opened his mouth wanting to say something, but in the end he remained silent and only nodded. Elder Wu Peng closed his eyes. A lustrous glow slowly surged out from the star catcher plate and finally entered the transparent needle. In an instant the needle seemed to have come to life. It became even more lustrous and transparent and faintly trembled. Then the needle finally began to spin. In just a moment the needle stopped and pointed straight in a certain direction. So fast? Elder Wu Peng opened his eyes in shock. Although the star catcher plate could sense the existence of that thing, it was actually not that accurate. Under normal circumstances, it would take at least 10 minutes to completely confirm the direction. But this time it was actually so fast? It seems that that thing is nearby. Elder Wu Peng had always been expressionless, but at this time he was actually faintly excited. He had used the star catcher plate to determine the direction 3 times before, and each time it would consume a lot of energy. But this time he felt that the star catcher plate had given him the answer as soon as he made a move. This could only prove that the thing they were looking for was not far away from them. Elder Wu Peng took a deep breath, suppressed the excitement in his heart, and looked in the direction of the needle on the star catcher plate. However, what he saw caused him to be stunned on the spot. Because the transparent needle was pointing in the direction they had just escaped. Could it be that that thing was over there? Elder Wu Peng's expression changed, and the expressions of the people beside him were even more interesting. They all knew very well what this result meant. How is this possible? Nan Yuxing subconsciously wanted to refute. There must be something wrong with the star catcher plate. Elder Wu Peng tested again. Elder Bai Tong frowned. Eldest young master, the star catcher plate has never been wrong, and it can't be tested a second time within a month. Besides, every time it is used, Wu Peng will lose a certain amount of his lifespan. The few of them fell silent. After a moment, Nanny couldn't help but ask. Then, doesn't this mean that we have to turn back? They had just escaped death over there. Moreover, anyone could see that the situation over there was dire straits. It was the most dangerous time. Wouldn't they be courting death if they went over now? Elder Wu Peng took a deep breath, put away the star catcher plate, and took the lead to walk forward. Digression. We'll continue tomorrow. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1666. Even if it was dangerous, since that thing was there, they still had to go over. Elder Wu Peng, Nan Yuxing called out hesitantly. It's the most dangerous time over there now. Why don't we go over later? Elder Wu Peng stopped in his tracks and turned back to look at him expressionlessly. Young master, we're not the only ones looking for that thing. If we're late and miss the opportunity, we'll have come here for nothing. Don't worry, with Bai Tong and I around, we'll definitely ensure the safety of you and 2nd Mississippi. I didn't. That was what he meant. Nan Yuxing took back his words halfway. He felt a little guilty when he heard this. Who were Elder Wu Peng and the others? How could they not see through his thoughts? Nan Yuxing felt a little embarrassed. In fact, he was usually very brave and had never been afraid of anything. Otherwise, he wouldn't have agreed to accompany Nanny to the god-slaying tomb. But he didn't expect this place to be more dangerous than he had imagined. He had suffered a lot of accidents and torture in the past 2 days. Every time he thought about it, he felt that his body hurt even more. Seeing Elder Wu Peng's firm attitude and that it was to find that thing, this reason was really irrefutable. Nan Yuxing hesitated for a while before he gritted his teeth and agreed. You're right. In this situation, we'd better find that thing and leave as soon as possible. Although Nanny was very scared, she couldn't refuse since everyone had said that they would go. Besides, it was her job to look for that thing. She followed as if to persuade Nan Yuxing, but also as if to comfort herself. Actually, I think that the battle over there might be over by the time we get there. Anyway, that black-robed man's target isn't us. After he's done, he probably won't deliberately find trouble with us. Elder Wu Peng looked ahead with a frown and a trace of worry flashed in his eyes. If that was the case, it couldn't be better. But that man said that it was his territory. If the thing was really there, then it wouldn't be so easy for them to take it away. Half of the sky had already been dyed the color of blood. An invisible pressure and murderous aura surged wildly between heaven and earth, almost making it difficult to breathe. Rong Xiu waved his sleeve and set up a barrier around Chu Ning. Tuanzi raised her head and took a look. What the hell is this? That cold and gloomy aura really made her uncomfortable. She waved her small hand and a scarlet gold flame whip instantly lashed out. Pah! The sound of something breaking through the air resounded. In the blink of an eye, the flaming whip had already arrived in front of the blood-colored pillar of light. However, as soon as the fire whip wrapped around it, a strange sizzling sound was heard. At the same time, a black mist drifted out. Accompanying it was an unbearable stench. The flame whip began to corrode at a speed visible to the naked eye. After a short while, the golden red whip broke in the middle. Furthermore, the parts that were wrapped around it were completely corroded. Dumpling was shocked and her eyes widened. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. Ever since she opened her 4th meridian and inherited her ancestors' power, she had been successful in every endeavor. This was the first time she had suffered a loss. From this, it could be seen that the other party's strength was much stronger than before. The black-robed man suddenly sneered. Since you're so arrogant, try out the power of the 3rd level first. As soon as he said that, the clouds in the sky suddenly moved. A thick blood-red color quickly condensed and transformed into an icicle that pierced downwards. The sharp sound of something breaking through the air caused one's scalp to tingle. It headed straight for Dumpling. Dumpling raised her head. The icicle was very long and about the height of a person. It was blood-red with a blunt top and sharp bottom, and had a cold luster. It descended from the sky at an increasing speed. Before it even arrived, she could already sense that extremely dangerous aura. A strong wind blew, and the golden bell on her head jingled as her skirt fluttered. From afar, it looked like a scarlet gold flame burning fiercely. She snorted softly, and with a tap of her toes, her small figure flew up instantly. He had chosen to face the attack head-on. In the blink of an eye, the two forces collided fiercely. Dumpling's fist was instantly cut by that sharp spike. An intense pain came instantly. Dumpling's brows furrowed. Ever since she transformed into her human form, she had never suffered a flesh wound. She snorted coldly, and her fist was suddenly covered with a layer of scarlet gold flame. That flame surged out in clusters, overlapping with each other. At a glance, it looked like layers of complicated feathers. The blood-red icicle finally stopped. Blood flowed continuously from Dumpling's hand, but that icicle was unable to move any further. Both parties were in a stalemate. At this moment the scene seemed to have stopped. But in reality both parties were still crazily killing each other. Dumpling's arm started to tremble slightly. She clenched her teeth and stimulated all the energy in her body. If they wanted to touch Ayu, they had to pass through her first. However, as time passed slowly, the power of the icicle did not decrease, but increased instead. Overestimating yourself. The black-robed man sneered disdainfully. How could the third level of the brilliant sky rod be so easily dealt with? As long as the brilliant sky rod was still there, this blood-red light pillar could continuously devour the surrounding energy of heaven and earth, turn it into its own use and pour it into the icicle. In other words, on the surface, this crimson gold sky phoenix was fighting with an icicle, but in reality, it was fighting against the brilliant sky rod that had erupted with all its strength. If the clan leader of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan was here, he might be able to put up a fight. But this little thing was simply not enough. Break. The black-robed man suddenly burst out with a cold shout. The blood-red color in the sky swayed even more and continued to pour energy into the icicle. That icicle had already pierced Dumpling's palm. In an instant, blood began to gush out at an even more shocking speed. Half of Dumpling's arm was stained with blood. Her round and adorable little face was also gradually turning pale at this moment. Needless to say, her little body was trembling even more violently. No, Ayu was below. Once she failed, Ayu would definitely be in danger. Dumpling gritted her teeth. The flames on her body had completely burned, almost covering her entire body. However, her body finally took half a step back uncontrollably. At the same time, her entire hand was almost pierced through by the icicle. The black-robed man raised his hand and then suddenly pressed down. That icicle seemed to be urged by this force and continued to pierce downwards. At this moment, an extremely cold voice suddenly rang out. I think, damn it, it's you. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1667. The black-robed man was shocked and turned his head to look, only to see that Chu Liwei had already finished outlining the profound formation in front of her at some point in time. A vast and mighty pressure slowly spread out from above. This aura caused his heart to unconsciously tremble. Grand Mystic Emperor Division? He almost blurted out in disbelief. When did she break through to this level? He actually didn't know at all? Moreover, how old was she now? How could she break through to the Grand Mystic Emperor Division so easily? Chu Liwei looked up slightly, her eyes clear and cold. Soon after, her somewhat pale lips slightly curled up, revealing a smile of unknown meaning. Even if she couldn't see the black-robed man's face, it wasn't hard for her to imagine his shock and astonishment, as well as a trace of unconcealable panic. You're very surprised? Chu Liwei asked softly. Actually, it's quite a coincidence. I just happened to break through right before you came and right here. What, isn't this your territory? You don't even know this? Chu Liu's words were like a sudden clap of thunder that suddenly exploded beside the black-robed man's ears. It caused his mind to tremble. How is that possible? If that was really the case, he would definitely know at the first moment. How could it be that only now? Suddenly his voice paused as if he thought of something. Could it be? Not knowing if it was an illusion or not, Chu Liwei actually heard a trace of panic from his tone. Panic? This person was arrogant, unbridled, and practically didn't put anyone in his eyes. From the moment they arrived, he put on an appearance that said he wasn't to be trifled with. Why was he suddenly panicking out of nowhere now? Did her words remind him of something? Chu Liwei narrowed her eyes, but couldn't be bothered to pay attention to him. She raised her eyes to look at Dumpling, who was currently confronting that icicle. When she saw Dumpling's bloody little hand, the last trace of a smile on her face quickly faded, and what replaced it was an undisguised strong killing intent. Minor Sky Shuttle Formation. Go! With a clear shout, Chu Liwei pushed the profound formation in front of her forward. The huge silver profound formation slowly floated up. The surrounding god realms seemed to have sensed something and nimbly avoided it one after another. Soon, the huge silver Shen formation was suspended in midair. It passed Dumpling's body, then floated to the top of Dumpling's head on to directly meet that icicle. With the help of this Shen formation, Tuanzi immediately felt relieved. At the same time, several streams of light lingered above the profound formation, binding the icicles. Then, it suddenly tightened. Crack. The crisp sound of something shattering could be heard. The icicle. Tuanzi was finally able to break free and fell down. Chu Liwei quickly went forward and hugged Tuanzi. Feeling, Dumpling God, Chu Liu of the God, of Chu, of God, of Chu. Chu Liwei patted her back with heartache. Dumpling, it's been hard on you. She took a look at Dumpling's hand. Her chubby little hand was almost pierced through. Her flesh was twisted and blood was dripping. She took a deep breath. A chill swept through her lungs, but it also felt like there was a ball of fire burning inside. It hurts a lot, right? Her voice was even softer, but her hands were even more nimble. She quickly took out an elixir and fed it to Dumpling. Dumpling nestled in her arms obediently and shook her head. It doesn't hurt. It's good that Ayu is fine. Chu Liwei put her down carefully. Then she took out medicine and gauze and carefully bandaged her wounds. Dumpling was afraid that she would be worried. She retracted her hands slightly and said in a crisp voice, Ayu, I am fine. These are all superficial wounds. They will heal very quickly. The crimson gold heavenly phoenix was an ancient divine beast. Her recovery ability was indeed extraordinary. But at this moment her wound was truly a ghastly sight. Chu Liu's eyes drooped slightly. Her hands were even gentler. Ever since Dumpling transformed into a human, she felt more and more sorry for her. Now that she was injured and it was caused by protecting her, how could she not care? Moreover, the icicles were very eerie and strange. She didn't know if there was something dirty in them. She had to personally make sure that they were dealt with properly. Chu Liwei didn't say anything. Dumpling frowned. Are you? I'm really fine. Chu Liwei finally stopped and looked up at Dumpling. I said that I would take good care of you in the future. I would never let you suffer. I will definitely do what I say. Dumpling's eyes reddened and her mouth flattened. Chu Liwei took her hand. Now, does it still hurt? Dumpling nodded sadly. It hurts. Chu Liwei hugged her again. If it hurts, I'll take revenge for you. She raised her head slightly and looked at the silver Shen formation. At this moment, it was suspended in the air and slowly rotating. It silently crushed the icicles and blocked all the threats on it. What was even more shocking was that the Shen formation was also crazily devouring the surrounding energy of heaven and earth and growing stronger. As the aura on it grew stronger, the Shen formation also started to expand. It was getting closer and closer to the blood-colored light pillar. This was taking the initiative to attack. The black-robed man was completely stunned. He felt that before he could react, Chu Liu's Shen formation had already started to attack. The most shocking thing was that it seemed to really have the power to contend with the brilliant sky rod. Even a great Shen King Master might not be able to do this, right? Moreover, she had just broken through. He suddenly raised his head and stared at the slowly rotating silver Shen formation that was still expanding. He didn't recognize this Shen formation. He only vaguely remembered that Chu Liwei had mentioned it before. It seemed to be some minor sky shuttle formation? Chu Liu's lips curled into a cold smile. Ordinary Shen formations naturally couldn't contend with a venerable god expert. However, this minor sky shuttle formation was different. Because it was a new Shen formation created by Chu Liwei after simplifying the sky shuttle formation. Although its overall power wasn't as strong as the real sky shuttle formation, Chu Liwei had learned quite a bit of its essence. Therefore, the power it could unleash was absolutely outstanding. The reason why Chu Liwei could unleash this Shen formation that was obviously stronger than her current strength was largely thanks to Debao. If he hadn't asked her to memorize those Shen formations by heart, if he hadn't helped her try to repair the sky shuttle formation, she definitely wouldn't have been able to do all these. This minor sky shuttle formation had almost exhausted all her strength. Victory or defeat depended on this one move. Rumble. The brilliant sky rod seemed to have sensed the threat. The blood-colored light pillar on it was affected by the energy and started to sway chaotically. The power that spread out in the sky also started to surge violently. The black-robed man slammed his palm on the brilliant sky rod. Thousand Peak Summit. In an instant, countless blood-colored icicles rapidly condensed and fell crazily. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1668. Almost at the same time, the minor sky shuttle formation shone brightly. The two sides clashed fiercely. Soon, the icicles were all swallowed by the silver flowing light. After that, there was a series of crackling sounds. The icicles were all quickly and completely shattered by the power of the minor sky shuttle formation. The black-robed man's body swayed and he almost fell to the ground. After this attack, the blood-red color in the sky almost completely dissipated. Only the blood-red pillar of light was left, and it was on the verge of collapse. The minor sky shuttle formation continued to approach. Finally, its edge collided with the blood-red pillar of light. The peerlessly formidable forces from both sides devoured each other without the slightest sound. Only the space in the surroundings that was constantly collapsing showed how intense the battle was at this moment. Nanyu Xing and the others were walking forward. Perhaps because they knew that the road ahead was dangerous, the atmosphere was tense. Suddenly, Elder Wu Peng stopped in his tracks. Wait. Hearing this, the few people behind him immediately stopped. Elder Bai Tong saw that his expression was not right, and followed his line of sight. What's wrong? It seemed that there was nothing wrong. Elder Wu Peng said in a low voice. Look at the sky over there. Just a moment ago it was still shrouded in blood, but now, it has suddenly disappeared. Only layers of dark clouds were left, and it was terrifyingly dark. After his reminder, the others suddenly understood. What does this mean? Nanyu Xing frowned. Elder Wu Peng paused, and his voice was even lower and colder. If I'm not wrong, the blood in the sky must be caused by the black-robed man. But now it's suddenly dissipated. It's really strange. Isn't that the end? Nanyu Xing asked. What was there to worry about? Since they came here, they had already decided to take the risk, hadn't they? Wasn't it a little too late to worry now? Elder Bai Tong suddenly thought of something and his expression froze. You mean, Rong Xiu's successful counterattack caused this situation? Elder Wu Peng shook his head. I'm not sure either. He did not see it with his own eyes, so everything was just a guess. How is that possible? Nanyu Xing immediately retorted. They had seen the black-robed man's strength. Even if Rong Xiu teamed up, it was impossible for them to win. Elder Wu Peng, I think you're worrying too much. Was it really that easy to defeat a God Highness? Elder Wu Peng frowned and nodded. Maybe I'm thinking too much. Let's continue. However, the further they went, the more dangerous it became. We should be more careful, it's never wrong. After saying that, they continued to walk forward. The battle between the minor sky shuttle formation and the blood-colored pillar of light continued. The surroundings were silent, and the air seemed to have frozen. Everyone's gazes were now focused on that spot. They both understood that this was an all-out attack from both sides. Win or lose, it all depended on this match. Suddenly, a faint cracking sound was heard. A crack suddenly appeared on the small sky shuttle formation. Chu Liyue's heart sank. It was as if a crack had appeared on the embankment. Even though it was small, it still couldn't be ignored. 1,000 Li dike can be destroyed by an ant hole. The surrounding energy was still surging, battering against the opening again and again. Gradually, that crack began to expand. The power of the entire minor sky shuttle formation was rapidly decreasing. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that in the end, the blood-colored pillar of light still had the upper hand in this battle. At this point, the black-robed man's heart finally calmed down. He clenched his fists and sneered. Sheng Wanyu, you're indeed powerful. If you were given a few more years, you would be able to fight me head-on. Unfortunately, you're still a little lacking. He was definitely going to win this match. As he spoke, a long crack had already appeared on the minor sky shuttle formation, and the speed of its rotation was gradually slowing down. In the end, it had almost completely stopped. The blood-colored pillar of light was constantly corroding the huge silver Xian formation. As the black fog drifted away, a thick stench spread to the surroundings, making people feel nauseous. Even though most of the power of the blood-colored light beam had been reduced in this battle, it was still the one with the upper hand, relatively speaking. Seeing this, Chuning couldn't help but step forward, becoming increasingly anxious. If it weren't for Rong Xiu's barrier, he wouldn't have been able to hold himself back and rushed forward. He didn't notice that the bloodstains on his palms were rapidly fading away. Moreover, a warm aura suddenly surged in his dantian, and then quickly spread to his limbs and bones. It was only when the scorching heat reached his hands that he finally realized that something was wrong, and he quickly lowered his head to take a look. What he saw caused his pupils to shrink slightly, because the numerous wounds on his hands had already recovered by more than half. Chu Ning's brows were tightly knitted, but there was no shock in the depths of his eyes, because this wasn't the first time this had happened. It was just that he had been in a daze most of the time, and he had been thinking about you, all along, so he didn't take this matter to heart. Who knew that it would start again now? At this moment, a loud explosion suddenly came from the front. Chu Ning immediately raised his head to look. The huge silver Shin formation had completely collapsed. Countless violent energies crazily spread in all directions. The blood-colored pillar of light suddenly slashed down from the sky. Like a blood sword, it slashed directly at Chu Luiyue. She suddenly raised her head. Digression. I finally had a good sleep yesterday and am back. 6 p.m. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1669. Countless divine realms gathered around her and formed a huge barrier around her. However, the blood-red light beam was extremely sharp and carried a shocking murderous intent. It tore through the air. Even the deity domains trembled violently and then collapsed one after another. The black-robed man sneered. You are indeed capable to be able to get them to help you. However, no matter what, these are only the divine realms of high god powerhouses. It was no different from wishful thinking if she wanted to fight against a high god powerhouse. The blood-red light beam was getting closer and closer. Chu Liyue's hair was swept up by the strong wind, and her clothes flapped wildly. "You," Dumpling called her nervously and instinctively wanted to go forward. Chu Liyue turned around and put her behind her while she stood in front of her. Dumpling grabbed her sleeve and refused to let go. Ayu wanted to stand in front of her? However, the Shin formation just now had almost exhausted all of Ayu's strength. At this moment, how could she block this attack? However, it was different for her. She was a crimson blood celestial phoenix. Her physical strength was strong to begin with, and she had inherited the strength of her ancestors. She would have no problem dealing with this. However, before she could say anything, Chu Liyue spoke first. Stay behind me. This was not a question, nor was it a compromise. It was an unquestionable order. Dumpling looked up and wanted to say something. Chu Liyue had already turned around, took a step forward and picked up the black shield from the ground. She crossed her legs slightly and placed the black shield in front of her. Since the appearance of those stones, everyone present had almost forgotten about the black shield's existence. Seeing Chu Liyue pick it up again, the black-robed man was stunned at first, but then he snorted disdainfully. If it was before, he might have been a little afraid of the black shield. But now, he had already used the third stage of the brilliant sky staff. This was not a threat at all. At the same time, the blood-red light beam had already slammed down. Chu Liyue held the shield high and stood in front of himself and Dumpling. Boom. An incomparably powerful force smashed heavily onto the black shield. Chu Liyue's arm instantly went numb. His body trembled violently and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Even the ground beneath her feet had sunk in deeply, and several cracks had appeared in the surroundings. From this, it could be seen how terrifying the power contained in this attack was. However, only a shallow mark was left on the black shield, but it did not crack. As for Chu Liyue, after forcefully swallowing the remaining blood in his chest, he was actually able to hold on. The black-robed man suddenly took a step forward. How could this be? Even if several high gods joined forces, they would not be able to withstand the brilliant sky staff's attack. What happened to Shang Guanyu? You seem disappointed that I didn't die? Chu Liyue raised his eyes, and the corner of his mouth that was dripping with blood slowly curved into an arrogant and unbridled smile. His clear eyes were filled with a raging battle intent. Seeing her smile, the black-robed man suddenly felt uneasy. No! He clenched the brilliant sky staff in his hand tightly, but his arms were trembling uncontrollably. You were the one who attacked previously. Now it should be my turn, right? Chu Liyue said slowly. As soon as she finished speaking, her eyes shone brightly. Whoosh! The stones that were scattered around her suddenly seemed to have been summoned by something, and they began to roll restlessly. Whoosh! Scarlet Cloud Sword suddenly appeared in her hand, and it shone with a cold light. When the black-robed man saw Scarlet Cloud Sword, he heaved a sigh of relief. Although it was a venerable divine weapon, she could not unleash its full power due to her current cultivation level. It was nothing to be afraid of. However, just as this thought flashed through his mind, he realized that something was wrong. This was because he realized that the deity territory had suddenly begun to rush towards Scarlet Cloud Sword. They transformed into streaks of light and condensed on the bright and sharp Scarlet Heaven Sword. Soon, Scarlet Cloud Sword was covered in a layer of extremely dazzling light. From afar it was filled with brilliant lights and vibrant colors. At the same time, a shocking pressure surged out from it. Sensing that terrifying aura, the black-robed man subconsciously took half a step back. She actually fused all the battle intent contained in the deity territory into Scarlet Cloud Sword. Although it was not a complete fusion, it had indeed greatly increased Scarlet Cloud Sword's power. One had to know that although these deity territories were not very strong, the battle intent surging within them was left behind from the shocking battle tens of thousands of years ago. It was extremely terrifying. Once it was condensed, it would be extremely terrifying. Sheng Wanyu. How did she think of this? Actually, Chu Liwei did this purely because she had a sudden inspiration and had a sudden idea. She knew very well that she was definitely not a match for this black-robed man with her own strength. Therefore she had to rely on external forces. Thus she thought of these stones. Rong Xiu had once said that these stones contained astonishing battle intent. She thought that perhaps she could borrow their strength to fight. In the end, things went smoother than expected. These stones seemed to be exceptionally obedient. She had only used her mind and they were extremely cooperative. Therefore, even if it was the first time she tried to use this method, the effect was surprisingly good. Sensing the surging battle intent on Scarlet Cloud Sword, Chu Liwei felt even more confident. She held the hilt of the sword tightly with one hand. When the last bit of battle intent had completely merged, she finally raised the sword. It fell fiercely. This sword did not have any tricks. It was extremely simple and neat. The sword light flickered, and the blood-colored light pillar was directly cut in half and completely disintegrated. The sword chi did not stop. Instead, it approached at an even more astonishing speed. It went straight for the black-robed man. The black-robed man knew that things were not good. He tapped the tip of his foot and immediately retreated. However, he was fast, but the sword chi was faster. In the blink of an eye, it was already in front of him. Helpless, he could only raise the brilliant sky staff in front of him. Clang, crack. Almost at the same time that the sword chi fell, a crisp cracking sound was suddenly heard. A crack had appeared on the brilliant sky staff. The tyrannical sword chi wrapped around the black-robed man, and his black robe fluttered crazily. He began to frantically mobilize the strength of his body. However, the 3 attacks of the brilliant sky staff had exhausted all his strength. At this moment he could no longer attack. In a hurry, he began to look around as if he was waiting for something. However, there was nothing. He became more and more anxious. It should not be like this. This was the tomb of the honored god. He had already fallen into such a situation. Why was there no movement? His hood was finally torn apart with a loud noise. Sensing this change, his mind suddenly panicked. In a battle between experts, a small mistake was enough to determine the outcome of the battle. Therefore, in the next moment, his defense completely collapsed, and his body flew out uncontrollably. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1670. At the same time, the hood on his head was finally torn apart completely, revealing his true appearance. When he fell to the ground, his first reaction was to cover his face with his sleeves. However, everyone present had excellent eyesight. It was obvious that it was useless for him to cover up now. Chu Liwei narrowed his eyes. It was the face of a man who looked to be in his 30s. His appearance was ordinary and his facial features were ordinary. He was unremarkable in the crowd. However, his eyes, were pure black. At a glance, it was empty and dark. It was indeed strange. Perhaps because he had suffered a series of huge blows, his body had become much more illusory and his aura was weak. The brilliant sky staff had been broken into 2. Half of it fell to the ground while the other half was still tightly held in his palm. The cut was smooth and neat. It was obvious how powerful the sword just now was. Of course, that did not mean that Chu Liwei was stronger than the other party. It could only be said that the battle intent in those stones was too strong. It was so strong that the sword cut him. Chu Liwei walked forward. The black-robed man trembled instinctively and wanted to retreat. However, he realized that his body seemed to be nailed to the ground and could not move. He was shocked and looked around in panic again. The vast and boundless wilderness was empty, silent, and cold. There were only pieces of broken tombstones that stood in a mess and did not move. There was no response. Just like the previous situation, the tombs had actually severed the connection between him and the tombs. and he had been completely abandoned. How could this be? How could this be? He could not figure it out. It had been fine for the past few years. He could borrow the power here and use it for himself. That was why he dared to say that this was his territory. But now, everything had become a lie. A pair of boots appeared in the corner of his eyes. His body froze and he suddenly stopped all his movements. The air seemed to have frozen. A dazzling sword light cut through the void and stabbed straight at him. Swoosh. The tip of the sword was pointed at his glabella. It was just an inch away. As long as Chu Luiyue wanted to, she could take his life directly. However, she did not make a move immediately. There were too many secrets hidden in this man. It would be a pity if she killed him just like that. What are you looking for? Chu Luiyue tilted his head and asked indifferently. She could clearly see that the man had been looking left and right since just now, as if he was looking for something or waiting for something. The black-robed man glanced at the broken brilliant heaven rod in his hand, and suddenly sneered. Then he casually threw away the remaining half. Don't you know what I'm looking for? His words were filled with mockery. Chu Luiyue narrowed his eyes slightly. Before she could say anything, the man had already closed his eyes. If you agree to a bet, you must accept your loss. Since I've lost to you today, then, you can kill me or torture me as you wish. He never thought of begging for mercy. Because he knew better than anyone that at this time, living was more painful than dying. It could only be said that there was a careless mistake. He had underestimated Shang Guanyu. Chu Luiyue found it even more interesting to see him begging for death. His pale lips curled into a cold smile. All these years you've attacked me many times. Now you want to die? How can there be such a good thing? The black-robed man's heart sank and he suddenly opened his eyes. What do you want? He knew her quite well. This woman was not easy to deal with. If he really fell into her hands, she would definitely have the means to make him suffer a fate worse than death. Chu Luiyue raised her chin. I don't want anything. I've always been a person who believes in reciprocity. You must have put in a lot of effort to give me those gifts before, so of course I have to return the favor. Let me ask you a few questions. If I'm satisfied with your answers, I'll give you a quick end. How about that? The black-robed man took a deep breath, but his heart was still burning. He sneered. What if you're still not satisfied with my answers? Chu Luiyue shrugged. Then you can only blame yourself for being unlucky. Shameless. The black-robed man had already expected her to do this, so he did not intend to agree to her request from the beginning. He closed his eyes again as if he had already made up his mind not to give her any answer. Chu Luiyue did not mind. She put down the black shield and took out the black wooden tablet. She weighed it in her hand and asked with interest, This thing is very important to the people of the Black Demon Cave, but since you've already betrayed us, I presume this thing is of no use to you? The black-robed man refused to answer, his attitude firm. Chu Luiyue glanced at him, then handed the black wooden tablet to Dumpling. Dumpling, get rid of this eyesore. Okay. Dumpling agreed crisply and took the wooden tablet. Her other hand was not injured, so she exerted force and the wooden tablet was reduced to dust. The black-robed man did not even bat an eyelid. Chu Luiyue nodded in understanding. It seems that you really have no connection with the Black Demon Cave, and you've found another way to store this soul. If I'm not wrong, it should be this black robe? Hearing this, the man suddenly opened his eyes. When he saw that Chu Luiyue seemed to have confirmed something, he came back to his senses and gritted his teeth. You tricked me? Chu Luiyue smiled. I was just guessing. Who knew that you would admit it so quickly? Without a physical body, the soul had to find something to store in order to successfully survive for a long time. Just like Taizu back then, several souls were separated and stored in the Dragon Abyss Sword and the Jade Pendant. And this man dared to use this black wooden tablet as bait and put it in her hands, which meant that he did not care about it. The higher the level of a person from the Black Demon Cave, the closer the connection with this wooden tablet. Based on this man's strength, he could not have easily broken free from this layer of restraint. He must have used some method to forcibly break free, otherwise he wouldn't have had such confidence. Chu Luiyue sized him up for a while. The black-robed man turned his gaze away. After that, no matter what Chu Luiyue said, he refused to speak. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. At this moment, Rong Xiu suddenly said, Mo Shichin still doesn't know that you're hiding here, right? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1671. These words finally caused the man to react. He suddenly looked at Rong Xiu, his eyes filled with bewilderment. What do you know? There was a hint of panic and fear in his words. Obviously, he was fearful and in awe of the Emo Shurchen that Rongxiu mentioned. Seeing his reaction, Chu Liwei asked curiously, "Why are you still here?" Emo Shurchen. Why does this name sound so familiar? Rongxiu raised his eyebrows. The leader of the Black Demon Cave. At the same time, he was also his former master. Chu Liwei suddenly understood. No wonder. She had indeed heard of this name before. It was just that a few years had passed and she had lost a lot of memories in the middle, so she did not immediately recall it. Only when Rongxiu said this did she recall. The black-robed man's expression turned even uglier. He stared at Rongxiu with a deadly gaze, afraid that the latter would say something shocking. However, Rongxiu did not continue to pay attention to him after asking this question. Instead, he walked in front of Chu Liwei and held her hand. A gentle force quickly entered her body, tidying up the wild force around her bit by bit, and at the same time healing her injuries. "I'm here. Don't force yourself." Rongxiu's voice was low and gentle. Chu Liwei immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Previously, she had indeed been barely holding on. After going through such a fierce battle, her strength had been completely exhausted. Even with the help of external forces, her body was still suffering from considerable pain and torment. It was just that she had been tense and did not dare to reveal anything. It was only now that she heard Rongxiu's whisper and felt the endless power and heat in his palm that she finally relaxed a little. "Did you have a good fight?" Rongxiu looked down at her and asked. Chu Liwei raised her head slightly and met his eyes. There were many things that did not need to be said. A look was enough. The corners of her mouth slowly raised into a smile, and she nodded with curved eyes. Yes. Everything that he had suffered before was finally paid back. She had been holding it in for several years, and now she was finally able to release it. Awesome. Seeing her happy, Rongxiu's thin lips also slightly raised a curve. That's good. You can leave the rest to me, right? Chu Liwei blushed slightly, but a warm current gushed out from the bottom of her heart. Even her limbs and bones warmed up. Others might find it strange that Rongxiu did not make a move from the beginning to the end. Only she knew that Rongxiu had done this on purpose. She had been pestered by this man for many years, and now she could finally settle all their grudges. In the end, it was best for him to take revenge with his own hands. Rongxiu had been watching everything from the side. He must have been having a hard time waiting, right? Chu Liwei gently nodded, then couldn't help but ask, "That's right. Leave his life to me." Rongxiu held his forehead helplessly, and the smile on his lips deepened. "I know. Other than when the two of them first met, when he helped her kill someone and made her unhappy, he had never made the same mistake again. This was also the reason why he didn't do it even though he had several opportunities to kill people." Chuning also came over at this time. Are you alright?" Even though the outcome was already decided, he still felt a lingering fear when he thought of what happened just now. At this moment, seeing her pale face, his heart was still throbbing with pain. Rongxiu let go of Chu Liwei's hand. "You go accompany Lord Chuning. I'll interrogate him." It wasn't easy for father and daughter to reunite, so they needed more time to spend together. Chu Liwei glanced at Rongxiu. This man could always guess what she was thinking and could always take care of all her feelings. She nodded and turned to look at Chuning. "Father." This call made Chuning's nose ache. He looked at Chu Liwei carefully. She was right in front of him. He clearly had a lot to say, but after seeing the face that he had been thinking about day and night, he suddenly couldn't say those words. After a while, Chuning said, Good. Your has grown up." This face was still the familiar face in his memory, but it had changed a lot. The youthful aura between her eyebrows had quietly dissipated. It was replaced by a subduing heroic spirit. Furthermore, there was an indescribable aura of nobility around her. That was a temperament that came from her bones. Just by standing there, she made people unconsciously submit to her. Chuning looked at her without blinking. She was obviously very familiar, but she was obviously different from the person in his memory. Looking at him emotional but not daring to step forward, Chu Liu's eyes suddenly turned red. "Father, your has made you suffer." Looking at the dense tears in her eyes, all the messy thoughts in Chuning's heart flew away in an instant, leaving only heartache. He hurriedly reached out to wipe her tears. No, you is the best. Don't cry, don't cry. Father's heart aches." Chu Liwei rarely cried. Although her eyes were red, she had been holding it in. But when she heard this, she suddenly couldn't help but cry. But she quickly held back the remaining tears. It was already a blessing in life to be able to see each other again. She couldn't be happier, let alone other things. With this, the final invisible barrier between the father and daughter was shattered. Tuanzi grabbed Chu Liyue's clothes with one hand and looked up at her. Then it looked at Chu Liyue and Chu Ning before breaking into a smile. On the other side, Rong Xiu stood in front of the black-robed man. The black-robed man became more and more nervous. Rong Xiu raised his sword-like eyebrows slightly and said with a faint smile, "If he knows that you are snatching something from him, guess how he will react?" Digression, I really don't have any more. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1672. The black-robed man clenched his fists unconsciously. Even though he had left the Black Demon Cave for several years, every time he heard that person's name, his heart would still tremble. It was still the same today. He opened his mouth wanting to defend himself, but he didn't know what to say. Rong Xiu's gaze was like a sharp blade, piercing straight into his heart. It was as if all lies were jokes in front of him. How do you know all this? Not many people knew that Mo Shiqian was also looking for that water droplet. In fact, in comparison, he was the one who was more high profile. However, Mo Shiqian had always been cautious, especially in the past few years. This time, he deliberately led Shangguan Yu here to avoid the eyes of the Black Demon Cave. However, I did not expect Rong Xiu to actually. He already came to find me. How do you think I know? Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly. If not for the fact that he can't leave the Black Demon Cave now, do you think you can live safely until today? The black-robed man gritted his teeth. The silence was almost suffocating. Hearing this, Chu Liyue blinked in surprise. Mo Shiqian went to look for you? Rong Xiu looked back, a faint smile on his lips. To be precise, you've seen him before. The one who appeared in the northern region of the primordial world was his illusion. Chu Liyue's heart skipped a beat. So that person was Mo Shiqian. She knew that other than the black-robed man, there had always been people who wanted to attack her, but she didn't think of this. Although she had met the other party before, the other party had never shown his true appearance, so she didn't know much about the other party. Unexpectedly, Rong Xiu glanced at the black-robed man and said indifferently, "A few years ago, Mo Shiqian had a capable subordinate, Shan Chen. This person was talented and deeply trusted by Mo Shiqian. In just a few years he grew from a nobody to Mo Shiqian's right-hand man. Rumor has it that Mo Shiqian once planned to leave the position of the head of the 8 Hall Masters to him. Unfortunately, before the celebration, this person inexplicably disappeared and there has been no news since then. Furthermore, all information related to this person in the Black Demon Cave was sealed and wiped out overnight. It's as if this person never existed. Many people thought that he was dead. But who would have thought that the once all-powerful figure in the Black Demon Cave was actually hiding in the god-slaying mound for several years? Rong Xiu spoke slowly, but every word he said was like a steel knife, fiercely scraping the man in the black robe. His expression changed from shock, suspicion, and disbelief to deep despair and fear. Originally he wanted to deny it, but Rong Xiu had said it so clearly. With just a few words he had completely exposed him. What else was there to refute? When Chu Liyue heard this, he also understood something. He looked at the black-robed man and frowned. "You betrayed the Black Demon Cave in order to steal my things?" The black-robed man suddenly sneered. "Don't you already know? Why are you asking me again?" His attitude was arrogant and perverse. Obviously he did not intend to cooperate. Rong Xiu was not in a hurry. He said calmly, "If you speak properly, I'll give you a quick death. If you continue to be like this, I think Mo Shiqian will be happy to receive this gift." These words finally made the black-robed man waver. He would rather die in the hands of these two people than go back to face Mo Shiqian. What he had done all these years was definitely enough for him to suffer a fate worse than death countless times. After a long silence, he finally gritted his teeth and said, "Do you mean what you say? If I say it and you go back on your word in the end, what will happen?" Rong Xiu chuckled. "Is it your turn to bargain now?" The black-robed man immediately fell silent. No matter what he chose, it was a dead end. The only difference was whether the pain before death was more or less. After a while he finally said, "I'll say it. Actually, the Black Demon Cave has been searching for that thing since many years ago. A few years ago, by chance, the Lord, Mo Shiqian received news that that thing might be born, so he personally led a few people to go. I was one of them. At that time, although we knew what he was looking for, we didn't know the details. We only knew that it was very important to him. Later we finally found traces of that thing. We searched for it for a long time without sleep or rest. We experienced countless difficulties and dangers in the process. In the end, when we finally saw that thing, only he and I were still alive. I thought that things would end once we found it, but it turned out that I was just overthinking. The black-robed man suddenly laughed self-deprecatingly. That thing has intelligence and refused to give in. It fought with us. It was also because of that battle that my body was damaged and he was seriously injured. As a result, he can't leave the Black Demon Cave until today. Chu Luiyue frowned. She really didn't know about these things. She remembered that when she obtained this water droplet, it was actually an extremely coincidental situation. Moreover, at that time she didn't even see what it was before it forcefully entered her body. Intelligence. It did have intelligence, but it didn't seem to resist or fight. Why did he say, it was so difficult and dangerous? There was a trace of hatred in the black-robed man's voice. At that time, in order to snatch that thing, he wanted to refine my soul and use it as a primer to subdue it. Unfortunately, I noticed it and tried my best to escape. Later, I accidentally broke into the god-slaying tomb and obtained an opportunity here. I stayed here and severed all ties with the Black Demon Cave. So Mo Shiqin had once wanted to kill him. No wonder, your connection with the black wooden token was also cut off at that time, right? Chu Luiyue asked. The black-robed man closed his eyes. That's right. He wanted to refine my soul, so he removed the restriction which gave me a chance to escape. Because of this, the people of the Black Demon Cave have never found any trace of me all these years. She didn't know if it was fortunate or unfortunate. From then on, I knew that that thing was the most precious treasure in the world. If I wanted to take revenge, I had to snatch it. Unfortunately, whether it was him or me, we were one step behind you. The black-robed man stared at Chu Luiyue and suddenly sneered. Actually, to be precise, that thing chose you. No matter how hard others tried, it was still useless. He didn't believe it before, but now he had to believe it. They had gone through several life-and-death situations and still couldn't get what they wanted, but she easily took it. Sometimes, the gap between people was just that big. After knowing that that thing followed you, we all had our eyes on you. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1673. It's just that all these years I've been acting in secret and never let him find any clues. Unfortunately, he was very cautious in doing this, because he knew too well what kind of methods Mo Shiqin would use to deal with him once he knew that he was still alive and wanted to snatch this thing from him. Every time he made a move, he would choose the right time and make all the preparations before taking action. Until this time, when the time was right, he finally used Chuning to lure her over. He thought that it was foolproof and was determined to win. Unfortunately, man proposes, God disposes. In the end, he still suffered a crushing defeat. At this point, I've said everything I need to say. As the black-robed man spoke, he closed his eyes as if he could kill or cut him up at will. The surroundings were silent. Only the wind on the wasteland blew past their ears, bringing with it a hint of coldness. Chu Luiyue stared at him for a while before finally digesting what he had said. After a moment, she took a step forward. The black-robed man thought that she was going to make a move and felt relieved. However, unexpectedly, Chu Luiyue was not going to kill him. I have 2 more questions. If you answer truthfully, I'll send you on your way personally. The black-robed man opened his eyes and frowned. He had already said everything clearly. What else did she want to ask? However, seeing that Chu Luiyue's expression did not seem to be fake, he asked patiently. What? First, back then, when you were determined to take revenge, you decided to compete with him for this thing. That means you know what it is? Second, when you were fighting with me just now, what were you waiting for? Chu Luiyue asked these 2 questions calmly. However, the black-robed man's expression changed instantly. He subconsciously looked away and frowned. After a while, he said, If you don't know what it is, how can others know? Besides, just now, you were wrong. I wasn't waiting for anything. Chu Luiyue smiled. It seems that you want to go back to the Black Demon Cave to take a look. You, the black-robed man was furious. Unfortunately, he was at the mercy of others. No matter how aggrieved he was, there was nothing he could do. Both sides were in a stalemate. After a long while, he finally opened his mouth with difficulty. That is, whoosh. A ripping sound could be heard. The black robe on his body seemed to have been ruthlessly torn apart by an invisible blade. Rong Xiu's eyes darkened and he immediately attacked. But it was too late. The black robe shattered at an even faster speed, turning into powder. As for the man's soul, it completely dissipated. In just a few breaths of time, the black-robed man had vanished into thin air. Not a single trace was left behind. Chu Luiyue frowned. That black robe is the reason why he was able to survive for so long. Perhaps due to some reason the black robe was destroyed on its own, and he was killed along with it. Rong Xiu's eyes flashed with a fierce look. What a pity, Chu Luiyue shook his head. Anyway, we've already asked all the questions we need to ask. As for the last 2 questions, I just want to confirm his attitude. In the end he was just a puppet. Rong Xiu looked at her. Chu Luiyue's lips curved up slightly. She then looked at her surroundings and said meaningfully, "This god-slaying mound, it really hides countless secrets, doesn't it?" At first she wasn't sure. But the black-robed man's reaction just now confirmed her guess. But after coming here she didn't feel threatened. Especially after these stones stuck to her, she seemed to feel more at ease walking in the god-slaying mound. Moreover, she had finally solved a problem that had been bothering her for years. This trip was worth it. "Let's go find Taizu first, then we'll leave this place after we meet up," Chu Luiyue said. Rong Xiu nodded and was about to speak, but suddenly his expression changed slightly, and he turned his head. Chu Luiyue followed his gaze and saw a few familiar figures. Her lips curled slightly, but there was no smile in her eyes. They really are haunting. Almost at the same time when Rong Xiu and Chu Luiyue looked over, Elder Wu Peng stopped in his tracks. Behind him, Nan Yuxing and the others also came to a stop. At this point they could finally see the scene in front of them. But everything in front of them shocked them to the core. How are they still alive? Nan Yuxing was shocked and muttered in disbelief, almost suspecting that he had seen wrongly. He rubbed his eyes and looked carefully, but found that the 2 people were still in his line of sight. Oh no, it was 4 people. In addition to Rong Xiu and Nan Yuxing, the little girl from before also appeared. Next to her, there was a middle-aged man covered in blood and in a sorry state. From the way they interacted with each other, it seemed that they were very close to them. But in addition to these 4 people, the black-robed man from before was nowhere to be seen. Elder Wu Peng's eyes quickly swept across the scene in front of him, and his heart slowly sank. The ground was a mess and it was clear that the battle here was intense. But Rong Xiu and the others were still standing here, and the black-robed man was nowhere to be seen. "Looks like the black-robed man lost," Elder Wu Peng lowered his voice. "How is that possible?" Nan Yuxing instinctively retorted. "He's so strong. Even if Rong Xiu and the others worked together, they wouldn't be able to defeat him." That was true. Even Elder Wu Peng himself felt that this conjecture was too absurd. But other than this answer, was there any other explanation? Then, could it be that the black-robed man suddenly showed mercy and let them go? Nan Yuxing choked. The others stopped talking. They had seen the black-robed man's attitude clearly. He would never reconcile with Rong Xiu and the others. But now, I felt that something was wrong just now. Elder Wu Peng clenched his fists. On the way here, they saw from afar that the blood-red color in the sky faded quickly, and the blood-red beam of light fell straight down, causing quite a commotion. At that time he thought that he was overthinking, but who knew? Elder Baitong couldn't help but say, "I think Rong Xiu and the others are a bit strange. Why don't we leave first and then, what a coincidence, we meet again." Before Elder Baitong could finish his sentence, Chu Luiyue smiled and greeted the few of them. "I remember that you all left before, saying that you were going to look for something, right? Why did you turn back halfway? Could it be that you want to come back and see how the battle is going?" With that, Chu Luiyue spread out his hands helplessly. "What a pity, I seem to have disappointed you. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network." Chapter 1674. Her words undoubtedly confirmed the guesses of Elder Wu Peng and the others. They looked at each other with sullen expressions. Although they came back for other important matters, they weren't in a good mood when they saw Rong Xiu and the others standing here safe and sound. Apart from shock, they were more puzzled. That black-robed man was a venerable god. Wasn't it a piece of cake to deal with them? What exactly happened in the middle to make the outcome turn out like this? They couldn't figure it out. They really couldn't figure it out. Nanny was annoyed at the sight of Chu Luiyue, and when she heard this, she was even angrier. However, before he could say anything, he was stopped by Elder Wu Peng. "You've misunderstood. We're not interested in your matters. We came back here because we have something else to deal with." Chu Luiyue blinked and looked around. "Oh, could it be that the thing you're looking for is here?" As soon as she finished speaking, the expressions of the people opposite her changed again. This surprised Chu Luiyue. She was just teasing and said it casually. Who knew that? It seemed to be true. This time she really couldn't help but laugh. It seems that I was right? Our matters have nothing to do with you. The black-robed man's inexplicable disappearance made Elder Wu Ping secretly wary of Rong Xiao and Chu Luiyue. No one knew what other trump cards they had. At this time it was best not to provoke them. Because of this he spoke more politely than before. Chu Luiyue raised her eyebrows. Originally she was really not interested in their matters. However, when she saw how nervous they were, she felt a little curious. These people had a strong background and had high standards. Something that they cared so much about should be an incredible treasure, right? But curiosity was one thing. She wasn't in the mood to care about their matters now. Finding Taizu was the most important thing now. Therefore, Chu Luiyue didn't bother too much with them. Her lips curved slightly. It's best if we don't interfere with each other's business. We're not interested in your business, so I hope you'll take care of yourselves. After saying that, they really turned around, intending to leave. Elder Wu Peng and the others didn't believe it at first, but seeing that they were really going to leave like this, they were a little bewildered. Rong Xiao and the others? Did they really not know anything? Nan Yuxing secretly clenched his fists. Looking at their backs, a thick killing intent flashed across his eyes. Unfortunately, they were all injured and Rong Xiao's strength was unfathomable. Otherwise, I should really let them stay here forever. He wouldn't let this matter go so easily. Once he left the god-slaying mound, he would definitely. Right? Rong Xiao paused and suddenly turned around to look at him. His deep and clear eyes landed directly on Nan Yuxing. Nan Yuxing's thoughts were instantly interrupted as he felt a chill enveloping his entire body. He couldn't help but shiver. What else do you want? He said fiercely. Rong Xiao's thin lips curled up slightly. Remember to greet Nan Yifan on behalf of I. After saying that, he turned around and continued to walk forward. Elder Wu Peng and the others were stunned and fell into a long silence. It wasn't until Rong Xiao and the others' figures gradually disappeared that Elder Bai Tong spoke in a low voice, breaking the silence. Could it be that Rong Xiao really knows the master? That wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that Rong Xiao's tone was too casual when he mentioned the master. It was as if he really didn't care about the master. It didn't look like he was faking it. At a time like this, what was the point of putting on an act? Unless he was really fearless. He dared to face the master directly. Nan Yuxing wanted to deny it, but he wasn't really a brainless person. He just had to think about it to know that Rong Xiao dared to do this for a reason. But why hadn't he heard father mention it before? Forget it. We'll talk about these things when we get back. Let's find the thing first and leave this place. Nan Yuxing said in frustration, but Rong Xiao's words before he left kept echoing in his ears, making him feel a little uneasy. After walking for some distance, Chuning looked back and asked, "What's the matter?" Who are they? It seemed that they were very hostile to you, and Rong Xiao. Chu Luiyue smiled. They're just some insignificant people. You don't have to care. Chuning saw that she looked relaxed, as if she really didn't care about those people. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. He patted Chu Luiyue's hand gently. That's good. His palm was very wide and thick with calluses on it. It was a little rough, but it was exceptionally warm. Suddenly Chu Luiyue was stunned and looked down. Father? Chuning didn't understand. Chu Luiyue grabbed his hand and looked at it for a while before asking curiously. Didn't you have a few wounds on your hand before? Why are they all gone now? She remembered clearly that those wounds were old and new, and 2 of them were especially serious. Even if he took medicine and recuperated well, according to her father's body, he would need a month to recover. But it had only been a while. Why were those wounds all gone? When Chuning heard that she was asking about this, he looked hesitant. In fact, he also knew that you had always been very meticulous. This matter couldn't be hidden from her for too long. It was just that he really didn't know how to say it. Father? Chu Luiyue saw his reaction and felt even more surprised. At the same time, she was a little worried. This matter was really abnormal. Could it be that father's body? Chuning saw that she was worried and hurriedly said, Don't worry. Actually, this situation has happened several times. I'm already used to it. Several times? Hearing this, Chu Luiyue was even more shocked. Yes. That is, every time after I get injured, those wounds will recover on their own after a while. I don't know what's going on. Chu Luiyue carefully looked him up and down and was surprised to find that not only his hand, but the other wounds on his body also seemed to have recovered. This was, Rong Xiao suddenly said, Lord Chuning, can you let me take your pulse? Digression. 6 p.m. tomorrow, we will resume at 12 p.m. Mobile users please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1675. Chu Ning and Chu Luiwei glanced at each other. Chu Luiwei released his hand and asked, "Do you know what's going on?" Rong Xiu pondered for a moment. "I'm not sure yet." As he spoke, Chu Ning had already extended his hand. Rong Xiu's well-defined fingers rested on his wrist. The surroundings were silent. Rong Xiu separated a portion of his force and injected it into Chu Ning's body. This force was like a stone thrown into a deep well, quickly disappearing in Chu Ning's body. Rong Xiu's brows moved slightly as he looked up at Chu Ning. "Lord Chu Ning, your current martial artist rank is?" Chu Ning's expression dimmed. "Some time ago I was seriously injured and my pill of origin was almost destroyed. My martial artist rank also fell back to rank 1. Now I'm no different from a useless person." Ever since he was brought away from the empire of Yao Qin, he had seen countless powerhouses. From then on, he knew that his little bit of strength was actually not enough in the outside world. Under such circumstances, he was unexpectedly seriously injured and became a rank 1 martial artist. He felt very embarrassed when he said it. Your had grown so well now, but he, Chu Luiwei frowned. Fell back to rank 1. Daddy must have encountered an extremely dangerous situation before. Could it be that something happened that caused his body to become like this? To be able to recover so quickly, it seems that he's not an ordinary rank 1 martial artist. Rong Xiu released his hand and paused for a moment before asking again, "Can you display a god territory now?" Chu Luiwei was shocked and his eyes widened slightly. Why did Rong Xiu suddenly ask this? Daddy has already fallen back to rank 1 martial artist, how can he have a god territory? However, Chu Ning did not immediately deny it. Instead, he frowned slightly and asked with some uncertainty. "Like, the ones that you summoned before?" Rong Xiu nodded, "Yes." After a moment of silence, Chu Ning actually nodded. "I think there have been 2. But at that time I didn't know what it was and it soon disappeared again." As he spoke, he hesitantly raised his hand. A streak of azure light slowly flew out. Chu Luiwei's heart suddenly jumped. This was actually a divine domain. Even though she had seen many storms and waves, when she saw this scene at this time, she was still shocked on the spot and was unable to recover for a long time. Just a second ago she was still immersed in the sad atmosphere of her father falling back to a rank 1 warrior, and in the blink of an eye she saw him summoning a divine territory, who would be able to endure such a drop in status. Chu Luiwei forcefully closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, the divine domain was still lingering around Chu Ning and had not disappeared. Her throat tightened as she struggled to speak. "This is, Father, your divine domain?" Chu Luiwei's voice was floating when she said these few words. Chu Ning nodded. "Previously I didn't know what this was. It was only when I saw you fight with that person today that I found out that this was the divine region." Chu Ning really didn't know anything about this. When his strength reached its peak in the past, he was only a rank 5 warrior in the empire of Yao Qin. And this strength was definitely considered top-notch in the entire empire of Yao Qin. However, a divine domain could only be obtained after breaking through a rank 9 warrior and successfully becoming a god-rank powerhouse. How did he have the chance to know this? At most, he had only seen this term a few times in some biographies. However, to him, those were things that were extremely far away. He would never have thought that one day he would actually possess a divine domain, especially since his current strength was only at the first stage of the warrior realm. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes today, he would never have thought of himself. Looking at Chu Ning's blank face, Chu Luiwei was speechless. She suddenly felt that she was really not enough in front of her father. What was the big deal about being able to fight above his level? What was the big deal about being able to contract with a divine beast? Her father had become a rank 1 warrior and had a divine domain. What kind of operation was this? Chu Luiwei really didn't understand. In the past, it was only others who called her a pervert. Now, she felt that compared to her father, she was really inferior. Sensing the strange gazes of the few people, Chu Ning felt a little awkward. "Actually, I don't know what's going on either. It's just that after I was injured that time, when I woke up again it became like this." At that time he was still sad for a long time because of the fall in his strength and didn't think about what this thing was at all. As expected. Rong Xiu's face revealed a look of relief as his thin lips curled up slightly. "I still have to congratulate Lord Chu Ning for obtaining such an opportunity." "Opportunity?" Chu Luiwei and Chu Ning asked in unison. Rong Xiu nodded. "If I'm not wrong, Lord Chu Ning should have obtained the indestructible divine body by chance." Chu Luiwei was shocked. Indestructible divine body. She had heard of this before. A few years ago at Lingxiao College, after she broke through to the divine level, she had been thinking about condensing a divine body. However, this matter was very complicated. Many divine level powerhouses, even after crossing the threshold of the divine level, could not condense their own divine body in their lifetime. At that time, she didn't know what kind of divine body was most suitable for her, so she searched through Lingxiao College's library. She remembered that in an ancient scroll, there was a record of this divine body. The so-called indestructible divine body was an extremely special divine body. 4 ordinary cultivators, their original body and divine body were separated. However, cultivators with the indestructible divine body could directly change their own body into a divine body. In other words, such cultivators would only have one body from the beginning to the end. Compared to other cultivators who could separate divine bodies, this was indeed a disadvantage. However, the indestructible divine body had an incomparable advantage. This divine body had extremely tenacious vitality. As long as there was still a breath left, it could quickly recover. Chu Luiyue looked at Chu Ning. Previously, he had so many terrible wounds on his body and they were serious. However, in this short period of time, those wounds had completely healed, and even a scar was hard to see. This was the indestructible divine body? But father is only a stage 1 warrior now, how could... Rong Xiu smiled and explained. Lord Chuning did not break through on his own, but he accidentally obtained some kind of opportunity and obtained the indestructible divine body. His original strength was not compatible with this. So I think that when he obtained the indestructible divine body, he automatically lowered his strength to that of a stage 1 warrior to make it easier for him to cultivate again. Also, Lord Chu Ning's Yuan Meridian level has been changed to the Tianjing Yuan Meridian. Rong Xiu raised his chin as he spoke. You can check his pulse yourself. Chu Luiyue actually believed his words, but she still could not help but go forward and check Chu Ning's pulse. After a moment, she released her hand with a shocked expression. When she looked at Chu Ning again, her gaze was very different from before. It really is the Tianjing Yuan Meridian. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1676. Chu Ning was stunned for a moment before he asked with uncertainty. Does this mean that I can continue to cultivate? Chu Luiyue didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Father, you can't just continue to cultivate. You've completely changed your fate. One had to know that even she hadn't forged her own divine body yet. She didn't expect her father to beat her to it. And it was such a precious and rare divine body. So what if he was a stage 1 warrior now? With the Tianjing Yuan Meridian, was there a need to worry about cultivation? After going in a big circle, it turned out to be a joyous occasion. Chu Ning saw that she was happy and smiled. So, father can continue to help you in the future? He had always been worried that he would become Yu's burden. He didn't expect that the heavens would always leave a way out. Chu Luiyue was excited and touched. After knowing that he had the indestructible divine body, the first person her father thought of was still her. She took a deep breath and said, I just want father to be well. Nothing else is important. She was really tormented during the time he was missing. She worried day and night, thinking about how to save him as soon as possible. When she thought about what kind of torture he would suffer, she was incomparably anxious. Chu Ning patted her head with heartache. Silly you, Now that she had become so powerful, if he could only become her burden by staying by her side, it would be better to end it once and for all. Now he could finally put down this worry. After confirming this matter, the atmosphere suddenly became much more relaxed. Chu Ning also had a long-lost smile on his face. The few of them continued to walk forward. As they walked, Chu Luiyue asked some relevant questions. She really wanted to know what her father had gone through for him to have such a fortuitous encounter. Unfortunately, Chu Ning himself wasn't very clear. During the long period of being detained, he moved from place to place, but he never knew where he was. In addition, he had been suffering a lot of pain and suffering, and most of the time he was in a daze, so he couldn't remember many things clearly. Although he had experienced several life and death situations, he never cared. The only belief in his mind was to live on and see In addition, he didn't understand many things. Even if it happened to him, he didn't know. For example, his Yuan Meridian and his God domain. At the end of the conversation, Chu Luiyue could only vaguely guess that his father had obtained the indestructible divine body by chance in the God-Slayer Mound. Also, it was the time when all the people from Jun Jiuqing were wiped out and he lost contact with his father. Chu Luiyue could only sigh. The truth was indeed unpredictable. At that time, How could she have imagined that her father would have such a fortuitous encounter? The indestructible divine body might be related to some expert who died in the god-slaying mound. Rong Xiu said. Chu Luiyue thought about it and felt that this was the most likely guess. However, didn't they say that in the battle back then all the experts were annihilated, leaving nothing behind? Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly. Those are just rumors after all. As for what the truth was, other than the people from back then, no one should know. Chu Luiyue thought about it and agreed. In the past, countless experts had died in the Dahuang swamp. People who came later to obtain the inheritance almost came one after another. It didn't make sense that there was nothing in the god-slaying mound. Not to mention the others, didn't she get a lot of stones alone? Of course they were very useful stones. And her father even had the indestructible divine body. Chu Luiyue didn't believe that this was really a barren land. Maybe someone didn't want others to come here to snatch the treasures, so they spread the news? Chu Luiyue guessed. Didn't those people say that they were looking for something here? What else could they be doing other than looking for treasures? Rong Xiu looked at her with appreciation. Some things didn't need to be said. She always understood. The god-slaying mound is extremely dangerous and the evil spirit lingers for a long time. Most of the people who came and didn't return. Even those who knew there were treasures here didn't dare to act rashly. And those who didn't know wouldn't come either. That was why this place was so quiet. Chu Luiyue nodded. The treasures were good, but they needed to be alive to get them. But even if they couldn't get it now, it was a good idea to spread the news and reduce the curiosity and interest of the people. These people were really... Chu Luiyue shook her head. I think this place... She hesitated for a moment but didn't finish her sentence. She changed the topic. When we find Taizu, we'll leave this place. Originally they had only come here to save their father. It would be best if he could leave safely after he was done with the matter. Chuning paused and asked. This Taizu, is he? Chu Luiyue smiled. She was so busy asking her father that she didn't have time to tell him about her own things. I'll tell you slowly. At this moment, Chu Luiyue was telling Chu Ning about her background and experiences. On the other hand, Nanyu Xing and the others were not in a good mood. The atmosphere was cold and stagnant. Nanyu Xing frowned tightly. Elder Wu Peng, are you serious about what you just said? That thing is not here now? Elder Wu Peng looked at Nanyi with a cold and solemn expression. Second Miss also has a certain sense of that thing, don't you think? Nanny's face turned ugly. It's indeed not here. Strange. I clearly felt it before. Why is it suddenly gone now? Elder Bai Tong couldn't help but ask. You mean, that thing moved on its own? Digression. Tomorrow afternoon, please browse and read together. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1677. I don't think so. Nanny furrowed her brows, but her tone was uncertain. Father didn't mention this before? She thought that they would just make a trip here and casually find that thing and take it away. After all, there were very few people in the world who could find the traces of that thing. Who knew that it would be so troublesome? Now that they had been searching for so long, they didn't even see a shadow. But that thing is not an ordinary item after all. Perhaps it has really changed places. As Elder Wu Peng spoke, he looked at Nanyi. Second Miss, can you investigate more carefully and see if you can find any clues? He should have been the one to do this, but he had just used the Great Star Compass not long ago. He couldn't use it a second time in such a short time. Thus, he could only place his hopes on Nanyi. Nanyi pursed her lips. I'll try. The reason why her father insisted on letting her come was because she had a certain talent in this area. Now it came in handy. However, every time she sensed something like this, her strength and mental strength would be greatly depleted. After that, she would feel very uncomfortable for a long time, so she usually didn't like to do this. But there was no other way now. Nanny closed her eyes and made a strange gesture with her hands in front of her. Then, a totem vaguely appeared between her brows. After a while, she slowly opened her eyes and pointed in a certain direction. Over there. Nanyu Xing looked satisfied. He is indeed amazing. Nanny couldn't help but look smug when she heard this. Of course, although she was a little willful, she was still capable. Otherwise she wouldn't have been doted on for so many years. After all, this was a world where strength was respected. Since we've confirmed the direction, let's go now. As Nanyu Xing spoke, he eagerly prepared to move forward. He really wanted to find that thing immediately and leave this place. However, Elder Bai Tong and Elder Wu Peng didn't move. Furthermore, the two of them had strange expressions on their faces. Nan Yuxing couldn't help but frown. Elders, why aren't you leaving? The two of them looked at each other and saw the complicated expression in each other's eyes. Elder Baitong said slowly. Eldest young master, don't you realize that something is wrong? Nan Yuxing was confused. Something was wrong? What was wrong with that? Hadn't he already sensed it? This proved that the thing was nearby. Elder Wu Peng said in a deep voice. The direction that second young mistress pointed to was the direction that Rong Xiu and the others left. Nan Yuxing was suddenly at a loss for words. His first reaction was to look at Nan Yi, his eyes filled with suspicion. Yi? Even though he didn't ask anything, the look in his eyes spoke volumes. Nan Yi instantly felt aggrieved. Brother, what do you mean by that? Are you doubting me? It took me a lot of effort to sense that weak aura. When Nan Yuxing saw how angry she was, he immediately dispelled the suspicion in his heart. No, big brother just feels that it's a bit too much of a coincidence. Although his sister was a little willful and arrogant, she didn't have the guts to be impudent in such matters. If she didn't do it on purpose, does that mean that thing really moved in that direction? The thought of Rong Xiu and the others in front of him made Nan Yuxing feel uncomfortable. Of all places, why did it have to go there? Elder Wu Peng didn't doubt Nan Yi's judgment, but this matter still alerted him. Eldest young master, second young mistress, don't you think that ever since we came here, this series of events is indeed too much of a coincidence? Previously, I used the star catcher great plate to deduce the direction it pointed to. At that time, Rong Xiu and the others were here. Now that they've left, second young mistress sensed that the thing is also in the direction they left. Wu Peng, do you mean that thing has been following Rong Xiu and the others? Elder Baitong's pupils constricted. Or is it actually with them? The moment he said this, the few of them fell into dead silence. Without a doubt, this was the outcome they didn't want to see. That's impossible, right? Nan Yi was also a little flustered. How can there be no movement at all if they want to subdue that thing? Besides, they've only been here for such a short time, how could they do it? Before coming, her father was worried that she wouldn't be able to handle it alone, so he asked her big brother and the two elders to accompany her. He also repeatedly instructed her that even if she would suffer a little during the process, she had to persevere until she brought the thing back intact. But what was going on now? Elder Wu Peng pondered for a moment and finally said, no matter what, I'm afraid we have to keep up with them first. If everything is just a misunderstanding, then it's easy to deal with. If it's really them. He didn't need to say the rest, and the few of them knew what he meant. At that time, a fierce battle would be inevitable. I think they're very vigilant. We have to be careful. Unless it's absolutely necessary, don't face them head-on. Elder Baitong thought about it for a long time before he decided to say these words. Seeing that Nan Yuxing's expression was getting uglier, he quickly added, after all, our main goal this time is to find that thing. Everything else can be put aside for the time being. Nan Yuxing clenched his fists. Let's go. Chu Luiyue revealed her true identity and told Chuning a lot of things that happened after they parted. Even though she had already made it brief enough, Chuning was still shocked to the core when he heard it. The princess of the Tianling dynasty, the last disciple of the dean of Lingxiao College, a high god expert who was less than 20 years old, all of this came out of Chu Luiyue's mouth extremely casually. But Chuning knew that behind these seemingly calm words, there were countless stormy waves. He had long guessed that her identity was extraordinary, but when he heard it for himself, he was still deeply shocked. And Rong Xiu's true identity made him unable to calm down for a long time. The son of Saint of the Yuntian Tower, a peerless genius who was no weaker than you. What surprised him the most was that he had already fallen in love with you, a few years ago. No wonder he took good care of you, from the beginning. After Chu Luiyue finished speaking, Chuning took a long time to digest all the information. So, the person we are looking for now is your real Taizu? Chu Luiyue nodded slightly. Taizu has always taken good care of me. This time he insisted on coming with me because he was worried about me. But not long after we came in we got separated. Hearing that he was someone who treated you, well, Chuning immediately became worried. This is extremely dangerous. Do you have any way of contacting him? Chu Luiyue smiled and comforted, don't worry. Taizu has been here before so there shouldn't be. Boom! A loud sound suddenly came from the distant sky. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1678. Chu Luiyue's voice stopped abruptly and she quickly looked up. It was evening and the sun was setting in the west. The last arc was gradually hidden in the thick clouds. The sky was filled with a warm orange color, as if the whole sky was plated with a layer of gold. In the god-slaying tomb, such a bright and brilliant scene was extremely rare. However, below that, the place where the sky and the earth met was covered by a faint shadow. Even the afterglow of the sun could not penetrate it. From afar, it looked like a piece of black that had been stagnant for a long time, with a kind of cold and lonely aura. Gradually, Chu Liwei found that the piece of black seemed to be expanding. And the loud sound just now seemed to have come from that place. However, it didn't sound like thunder. At such a distance, it was faint and could not be heard clearly. What is that? Chu Liwei frowned slightly. This aura was really not right. Chu Ning suddenly said, "That's a wall." Chu Liwei was stunned and turned to look at him. A wall? Chu Ning nodded, his eyes fixed on the piece of black in the distance, his face solemn. Yes. I have seen this wall twice before and this is the third time. As he spoke, Chu Ning raised his hand and pointed to the left and right sides of the piece of black. This wall will spread from one end to the other, and in a quarter of an hour, it will occupy the entire horizon as far as we can see. Chu Liwei looked in the direction of his finger and found that the piece of black was indeed spreading rapidly to both sides. At this time she could vaguely see that it was indeed a wall. It was completely black, solemn and majestic and unapproachable. Before she got close, she seemed to be able to feel the murderous aura on it. She frowned secretly. Such a strong aura would not appear for no reason. Father, how often does this wall appear? Did it suddenly appear like this the last 2 times? Chu Ning shook his head. It doesn't appear at a fixed time. So far, I have only seen it 3 times, and before, my physical and mental state was not very good, so I did not pay much attention to it. I only know that each time, it appears at sunset and disappears at dawn. It never appears during the day. He paused for a moment before he added. When I first saw this wall, I had just been exiled here. At that time, I thought that I could leave this place by crossing the wall, so I tried my best to go there, but before I reached it, it was already dawn and it disappeared directly. Later, I knew that it had nothing to do with whether I could get out or not, so I did not pay attention to it. Chu Liwei nodded, looking at a mountain. Although from here the wall did not seem to be very far. But if they really wanted to walk to it, it would a lot of effort. However, why would a wall suddenly appear out of nowhere in this place? There were too many strange things in this god-slaying mound. Just as she was about to wait and see, a stone suddenly jumped out of the ring of cosmos and rolled to Chu Liwei's feet. Chu Liwei lowered her head. The stone rolled forward a little. Chu Liwei raised her eyebrows high, but her feet did not move. Soon the second stone jumped out, also touched her feet and then rolled forward. This time it went farther than the previous one but in the same direction, toward the wall in the sky. When the third stone jumped out, Chu Liwei finally spoke. You want me to go there? The stone could not speak, but this series of actions could not be more obvious. Chu Liwei touched her chin. She knew that they would not harm her. Since they were so eager to urge her to go there, there should be a reason. Seeing this scene, Chu Ning's eyes flashed with a touch of surprise. In fact, he had heard Chu Liwei briefly mention the origin of these stones before. And in the battle between Chu Liwei and the black-robed man, he had seen clearly the amazing power contained in these stones. But at this time when he saw it again, he could not help but feel strange. It seems that they really want you to go there. Rong Xiu said with a slight smile. Chu Liwei spread her hands and smiled helplessly. I can see that too. But it is really far away and I can't sense anything now. In this place the unknown often means danger. If it is really dangerous, we can retreat when the time comes. Since we can see this wall, Senior Shangguan should be able to see it too. Perhaps. He will appear there and wait to meet up with us. Rong Xiu's words made Chu Liu's eyes light up. Right. She had almost forgotten this point. The boundless wilderness was vast and boundless. At a glance, all the scenery was the same. Without experience, it would be difficult to even distinguish the direction here, let alone find a person. That was indeed no different from looking for a needle in a haystack. If Taizu was safe and sound, it was very likely that they would do that. Chu Liwei made up her mind. Then let's go take a look first. If they could arrive before dawn and find Taizu, that would be the best. If not, they would find another way. Chu Liwei did not dare to have too much hope. That was because the wall on the horizon was still spreading to both sides. The more so it was, the wider it covered, and the slimmer the chance of successfully meeting up with Taizu. However, even if there was only a glimmer of hope, Chu Liwei was unwilling to give up. She put away the stone and walked forward. At the same time, Sheng Wanjing was also walking towards the wall. He had been walking for a long time and had consumed a lot of his god conduit power, but he had only shortened a portion of the distance. He clearly felt that the wall was in front of him, but he could not touch it. Fortunately, it was not his first time here, nor was it his first time encountering such a situation, so his emotions were very stable. He just kept moving forward. Calculating the time, and the others should have seen the wall by now. It was just that he did not know if they were on his side or on the opposite side. If they were on the same side it would be fine, but if they were on the opposite side, it would be extremely difficult to see them. Sheng Wanjing stopped in his tracks and took a deep breath. After calming down a little, he continued to move forward. The last ray of light gradually dissipated. Dusk finally fell. In the dark, one's eyesight would often become very poor, especially on such a starless and moonless night. However, the miraculous thing was that Chu Liwei could still see the black wall clearly. It was a different kind of black. It was rich, solemn, serious, and unattainable. It stood quietly between heaven and earth as if it had existed for tens of thousands of years. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1679. This was a very subtle feeling that couldn't be described in words. But as long as one looked up and saw the thick black, one would unconsciously feel this way. Gradually, Chu Liyue's worried heart calmed down. There seemed to be an invisible force that made her feel inexplicably at ease. Noticing this, Chu Liyue narrowed her eyes. Strange, this feeling was really strange. Originally she was a little repulsed and uneasy to get close to the wall. But now the closer she got, the calmer she became. In fact, there was even a faint sense of familiarity. She didn't know where this feeling came from, but she didn't reject it. Could it be? Was it because of the stones she collected before? After all, they had been here for tens of thousands of years, so they should be very familiar with everything here. But Chu Liyue still felt that something was wrong. She felt that she seemed to have overlooked something important, but she couldn't remember it for a while. These messy thoughts kept flashing in Chu Liyue's mind. But she didn't stop walking. At a certain moment, Chu Liyue finally noticed that there was a slight change in the void in front of her. She stopped in her tracks and reached out her hand. With her finger as the center, several ripples spread out in all directions. This is a boundary, Chu Liyue said with certainty. Moreover, the pressure on it didn't seem weak. Because it was transparent and at night, it was even harder to detect. She only felt that something was wrong when she got close. But this boundary didn't seem to be a threat. Rong Xiu took her hand and waved his sleeve, and the boundary in front of them instantly dispersed. He walked in front, raised his eyebrows slightly and smiled carelessly. Maybe it's the collision of the many forces left in the god-slaying mound, and the turbulence of the void surged, inadvertently forming a boundary. It's nothing to worry about. Chu Liyue nodded in agreement. Wasn't Taizu swept away by a turbulence of the void? Here, the forces accumulated for tens of thousands of years were constantly intertwined, so it was normal for such a situation to occur. Moreover, she didn't sense any threat from the boundary. She quickly put this matter behind her and continued to walk forward. Around half an hour after they left, a few more figures showed up at the same place. It was Nanyu Xing and the others. They didn't look good, especially Elder Bai Tong, whose face was particularly pale. His calf was cut off and now he could only walk with one leg. Along the way he was undoubtedly the one who had suffered the most. Even though he had used top-notch medicinal pills to keep himself alive, his injuries were too severe. Moreover, it was impossible for him to regrow half of his calf in a short period of time. Suffering was unavoidable. Elder Wu Peng glanced at him and said, "Why don't we take a break?" "No." Elder Bai Tong hurriedly rejected this suggestion with a guilty expression. "They're not slow. Because of me we've already lagged behind for a while. If we rest now, I'm afraid we'll be delayed even more." Elder Wu Peng frowned, but he had to admit that what he said was the truth. What are they planning to do? It's so late at night. Are they going to keep walking without resting? Nanyu Xing was also very dissatisfied. Although his injuries were lighter than Elder Bai Tong's, he really couldn't take it anymore. At first, they were worried that they would be discovered by Rong Xiu and the others if they got too close. But later they realized that they were thinking too much. Because with their current speed, it was already very difficult for them to not lose them. How could they care about anything else? What was even more hateful was that at this time, those people still didn't stop. Who could stand it if this continued? Elder Wu Peng looked at Nanyi. "Second miss, what's the result of your investigation?" Nanyi pursed her lips. "That thing, has indeed been following them. At this point, it was almost certain that the thing was with them. Although it sounded unbelievable, but Nanny had followed them all the way, so it was impossible for her to be wrong. This also meant that they had to catch up with Rongxiu and the others and take the opportunity to take back the thing. If they were at their peak, it might not be too much of a problem, but the key was now. Even if they joined forces, they probably wouldn't be a match for Rongxiu and the others. Nanny paced back and forth in frustration. If I had known this would happen, I would have asked father to send more people over. Before she could finish speaking, she suddenly felt her body become heavy, as if a heavy object was pressing down on her shoulders. Her low exclamation immediately attracted the attention of the few people. Yee. Second miss. Nanny gritted her teeth and barely managed to stand firm. She then looked up in panic and looked around. Several ripples gently spread out, as if forming a huge cage trapping her within. Oh, it wasn't just her. Elder Wu Peng and the others were also included in this range. This is a barrier, Elder Wu Peng shouted in a deep voice. At the same time, he waved his sleeves, wanting to bring Nanny out. However, the surrounding space became heavy and stagnant, and every movement became incomparably difficult. The moment he moved, it was as if there were countless invisible hands pulling him crazily, trapping him in place. Elder Wu Ping knew that something was wrong. He quickly mobilized the force in his body, but it was still in vain. Nanyu Xing and Elder Bai Tong were also trapped. They were trapped in this strange barrier just like that. Every step forward became extremely difficult. What's going on? Nanyu Xing was anxious and panicked. When Rongxiu and the others passed by just now, everything was normal. Such a situation didn't happen at all. Elder Wu Ping gritted his teeth and said, "The surrounding energy of heaven and earth is chaotic, causing this situation. I'm afraid it'll be difficult to break free for a while." Even he couldn't break free? Nanyu Xing's heart sank. Then why do Rongxiu and the others seem to be fine? They had seen those people pass through here with their own eyes. Elder Wu Peng's face was solemn, and his brows were tightly knitted. How could he not want to know why? Along the way he had been walking at the front and saw the clearest. But from the beginning to the end, he didn't notice anything unusual. Who knew that there would be such a big problem here? He looked up and secretly gritted his teeth. This situation won't create any danger, but it will greatly slow down our speed. This time, I'm afraid we won't be able to catch up. How can this be? Nanyu Xing was anxious. Don't forget that it's very likely that that thing is in their hands. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1680. Nanny suddenly said, "Why don't we ask Uncle Luo Yen to come over?" As soon as he finished speaking, everyone in the room fell silent. Nanyu Xing asked hesitantly, I'm afraid it's not very appropriate, right? Uncle Luo Yen usually focuses on cultivation and never gets involved in the matters of the clan. Besides, this time father's original intention was to train you more. Only when you personally bring that thing back can you get the approval of everyone in the clan. If we let Uncle Luo Yen off, when we go back there will be some people whispering. Then do we have any other way now? Nanny was also full of anger and her attitude became more and more impatient. She didn't want to make this trip in the first place and now she had suffered so much. Actually, it was just a matter that her father could solve by sending a few more people over. Why did he have to make it so troublesome? Do we have to all get into trouble here before we can let this matter rest? Second miss. These words are inauspicious and you can't say them carelessly. Elder Bai Tong hurriedly said. You and eldest young master will definitely be successful. Nanny turned her face away and sneered in her heart. Now that the situation was like this, what was there to talk about? Whether they could return safely was a big problem. Nanyu Xing's face was tense and he hesitated for a long time. Actually, he also knew that the current situation was almost a hopeless situation. If they didn't find someone, they might really not be able to complete the mission and return. However, inviting Uncle Luo Yen over was a little inappropriate. Big brother, Uncle Luo Yen has always doted on me the most. I'm asking him to save me, not to help me find that thing. Can't I do that? Nanny's words finally made Nanyu Xing relent. Okay. It was already late at night. The wilderness was dark and terrifyingly silent. Only the sound of the wind kept brushing past their ears, bringing with it a hint of coldness. Chu Luiyue finally stopped in her tracks. She first turned around to take a look. It was quiet and there was no one around. She had finally gotten rid of those annoying shadows. She didn't know what Nanyu Xing and the others were thinking, but they seemed to be sticking to them along the way. At first she thought she was overthinking, but later she realized that they were indeed tailing them. Although they had been very careful, Chu Liwei was carrying so many stones on his body. He was very sensitive to his surroundings, so how could he not notice them? It was just that she wanted to find Taizu first, so she couldn't be bothered with them. Fortunately, she was in the right place at the right time. She used some tricks and successfully shook them off. Chu Liwei let out a sigh of relief as he finally had some peace and quiet. Then he retracted his gaze and looked forward. At that moment they were only 100 zhang away from the wall. Standing there he could already see the rough appearance of the wall. Solemn, dignified, simple and bloody. After taking a look, these words instantly surfaced in Chu Liue's mind. Huge black stone bricks were piled up in a neat and orderly manner. Even though it had been eroded by the passage of time and was mottled, it was not difficult to see the grandeur of the past. The wall was very high. When Chu Liue looked up she could barely see the top. At a glance, it was as if the wall was connected to the sky. Moreover, the wall extended to the left and right. It was a long road with no end in sight. Chu Liue and the others stood there as small as ants. Why is there such a wall in the god-slaying tomb? Chu Liue murmured, frowning slightly. Also, this place is filled with a strong murderous aura. It was the place with the most terrifying murderous aura ever since she entered the god-slaying tomb. Standing so far away, she could feel the terrifying murderous aura coming at her, almost tearing her apart. This wall was left behind in the shocking battle back then, Suke said. He suddenly spoke. His voice was cold and calm, as if he was telling a distant story in a yellowed ancient book, with a trace of obscurity. Chu Liue turned around. You're saying, this wall has been around since then? Rong Xiao nodded, looking at her eyes full of curiosity. His thin lips curved into a faint smile. It is said that the two sides didn't want to fight to the death back then, so they agreed to divide and conquer. Unfortunately, the battle still broke out later. The location of this wall became a very famous place where the battle was fought to the death back then. I see, Chu Liue nodded. No wonder the wall was so imposing and filled with a strong murderous aura. It was indeed related to the battle back then. Speaking of this, she was even more curious. To be able to attract so many strong people to gather here and die one after another? Is it really just because of a book? Rong Xiao lowered his eyes slightly. It is normal for people to die for wealth and birds to die for food. Chu Liue touched her chin. Then who won in the end? And whose hands did the book fall into? Rong Xiao shook his head. I heard that the casualties on both sides were shocking, but who got the book in the end has become an eternal secret. Chu Liue felt a little regretful when she heard this. But after all, this was something that happened tens of thousands of years ago, and the descendants indeed had no way to know. She put away her thoughts, turned her wrist and took out the long yuan sword. Although she didn't use the long yuan sword much now, Taizu had been here for thousands of years and had left his aura long ago. Now it was convenient for her to find him. Chu Liue held her breath and began to carefully check the surroundings. She didn't find anything. She was not discouraged. As she walked forward, she kept trying to find Taizu's trace. It was not easy to find a person in such a big place. Even if Taizu also saw the wall and came here, he might not be in the same place and at the same time as them. After a while, Chu Liue thought of something and released those stones from the Ring of Cosmos. These stones rolled in all directions. After all, they were objects that had existed here for tens of thousands of years. With them, Chu Liue could undoubtedly expand her range of perception again. After a while, a low sound of a string suddenly came into her ears. Chu Liue was startled and looked up subconsciously. The sound seemed to be coming from that wall. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from the Love Network. Chapter 1681. Chu Liue took a few steps forward. But the sound was still very far away, as if it came from a very far place, faintly discernible. It was like a feather gently brushing across her heart, tickling her. Chu Liue stepped forward again, her eyes fixed on the black wall. Seeing her actions and expression, Chu Ning suddenly asked, what are you doing? Chu Liue was stunned and came back to her senses. Looking at Chu Ning's expression, she suddenly realized something. Father, didn't you hear anything? Chu Ning was at a loss. What sound? I didn't hear anything. Chu Liue frowned. Come closer and listen more carefully. Chu Ning walked over and stood beside her, listening attentively. After a moment he still shook his head. No. He didn't hear anything. Chu Liue suddenly had a subtle feeling in her heart. Was it because her father was only a stage 1 warrior and his hearing wasn't as good as hers so he couldn't hear it? She looked at Rongxiu. The two of them looked at each other. Rongxiu asked, what did you hear? Chu Liyue's heart sank slightly. You can't hear it either? Rongxiu nodded. Chu Liyue pursed her lips. It would be fine if her father couldn't hear it alone, but now even Rongxiu, who was stronger, couldn't hear it. Was she really the only one who could hear it? She closed her eyes to make sure it wasn't an illusion. Although the sound was low and indistinct, it was real. She paused for a moment before saying, I heard it. It sounded like someone was playing the zither. The sound was pleasant and moved one's heart. The rhythm was light and slow, but it was very captivating. That sound came from inside the wall. Chu Liyue said and walked forward. The closer she got to the wall, the more intense and crazy the murderous aura was. But perhaps because of the stones, Chu Liyue didn't feel too uncomfortable. She quickly adapted to the environment. Chuning and Rongxiu followed. Rongxiu was fine, but Chuning's face quickly turned pale. Although he now had the indestructible divine body, his strength as a martial artist was indeed only at rank 1. This point was irrefutable. Apart from having an advantage in terms of divine body, there was still a big gap between him and ordinary high gods in other aspects. Chu Liyue said, Father, you don't need to come over. I went back after I figured out what was going on with this thing. Tuanzi, you go and keep her company. Tuanzi nodded obediently and ran to Chuning's side, holding his hand. Grandpa Chu, I'm coming. Chuning already knew Dumpling's true identity, but every time he saw her cute little face, he would forget about it. Only love and affection were left in his eyes. He hurriedly said, Good. Dumpling is the most obedient. He patted Dumpling's head gently. He liked it very much. But on second thought he said, Grandpa Chu is fine. Grandpa Chu is fine. Tuanzi, you'd better go to Yua. He felt that the closer they were to the wall, the more dangerous it was. And you, said that she heard something. He couldn't help but worry. Tuanzi opened her mouth and smiled brightly. It's fine. His Highness is with Ayu. Rongxiu stopped in his tracks. His thin lips curled into a satisfied smile. This child is teachable. Chuning heard this and felt that it made sense. He also nodded. Holding Dumpling's little hand, they waited together. Chu Liyue finally stopped in front of the wall. Standing close to it, all the marks on the wall could be seen clearly. Countless knife and sword marks had gradually blurred over the years. Only deep and shallow marks were left, mottled and intertwined. She could even smell a faint smell of blood. Mixed with wind, frost, and dust, it inexplicably carried a sense of desolation and tragedy. Chu Liyue's mood also became heavy. She stared in front of her in a daze. Countless emotions seemed to surge in her heart. But she couldn't describe the specifics. He could only allow these complicated emotions to continuously surge in his chest and abdomen. She stretched out her hand and slowly placed it on the wall. It was cold, rough, and heavy to the touch. However, the sound of the zither suddenly became clear. Down, down, down. It all fell into her ears and smashed into her heart. In the dark, she seemed to see a figure standing alone in the lonely and cold wilderness. She couldn't see the figure and appearance of the person clearly. She didn't even know whether the person was a man or a woman. She only saw the person holding the zither in his arms and gently plucking the strings with his fingers. And the sound of the zither flew out from under the person's hand. The sound of the zither, which was supposed to be light and cheerful, inexplicably carried a trace of desolation. The world was dark and the wind and clouds moved. In the emptiness, there was only one person accompanied by the zither. Time passed slowly. The speed of the person's fingers plucking the strings gradually increased. The originally boundless and distant sound was suddenly tainted with a trace of killing intent. The sound of the zither clanged. In an instant the world seemed to change color. Chu Liyue's heart suddenly felt as if it was tightly gripped by something. The sound of the zither became more urgent. In an instant, it was as if she saw the shadows of knives and swords and blood splattered everywhere. Chu Liyue suddenly felt a sweet and fishy taste in her mouth. Rongxiu's clear and low voice suddenly echoed in her ears. She suddenly came back to her senses. Rongxiu had already grabbed her hand and retreated from the wall. Clang. The sound of the zither stopped. Everything disappeared without a trace. Chu Liyue's body trembled, and she suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Digression. Today is the winter solstice, eating dumplings or glutinous rice balls. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1682. You. Chuning and Dumpling were both shocked. Chu Luiyue didn't look any different before, so no one expected her to vomit blood all of a sudden. Chu Luiyue shook her head. I'm fine. Rong Xiu took out a snow-white handkerchief and helped her wipe the blood from the corner of her mouth. At the same time, he injected his force into Chu Luiyue's body to help her sort out the violent force. Rong Xiu only withdrew his force when her breath gradually calmed down, but he didn't let go of her hand. Chu Luiyue held his hand and gave him a reassuring look. I'm really fine. It's just that I wasn't paying attention just now, so the force in my body went berserk. But fortunately, Rong Xiu acted in time and stopped the movement before it could cause a commotion. Although she vomited blood, her body wasn't affected too much. Rong Xiu had personally checked her body's condition and knew that she was telling the truth. He was relieved. However, that pair of deep phoenix eyes were still filled with a biting cold aura. Just now. What happened? This was also what Chuning and Dumpling wanted to know the most. Chu Luiyue breathed a sigh of relief. Although she felt that the encounter just now was a little strange and unreal, she decided to tell the truth in the end. I heard someone playing the zither just now. Then she told him everything that she had felt just now. Chuning frowned. Dumpling looked worried. Rong Xiu narrowed his eyes and seemed to be deep in thought. No one knew what he was thinking. That zither sound seemed to have a magical power that made people involuntarily indulge in it. And as time passed, the zither sound became more and more urgent and murderous. Just now I was careless, so... Chu Luiyue suddenly paused when she said this. Father, Rong Xiu, did you really not hear anything? Rong Xiu looked up slightly and said in a gentle but firm tone. No. At this moment, Chu Luiyue saw a figure flash out of the corner of his eye. It was Chuning who was walking towards him quickly. The baleful aura here was very thick and it was very difficult for him to walk. After a few steps, his forehead was covered with sweat, and his lips gradually turned pale. Father? Chu Luiyue was a little surprised. Just as she was about to stop her, Chuning had already gritted her teeth and walked to her side. He let out a long sigh, then reached out his hand toward the wall without hesitation. Father. Chu Luiyue was shocked and immediately reached out to stop him. Chuning shook his head. Don't worry. Father only came to take a look to see if there's anything strange about this place. Just watching from the side made him feel uneasy. Especially when he saw that she was injured, he felt even worse. Anyway, Daddy has a divine body now, so I'm not afraid of getting hurt. Chu Luiyue's heart warmed and he didn't say anything else. Chuning placed his hand on the black wall. After a long while, he loosened his grip, and there was a hint of disappointment in his eyes. Obviously, he still didn't hear anything. Chu Luiyue wasn't surprised by this result. What she found strange was, why was she the only one who could hear the sound of the zither? Moreover, when she placed her hand on the wall, the sound of the zither immediately became clear, as if it was echoing in her ears. When she let go of her hand, this feeling quickly disappeared. She held her breath and concentrated, but she could still hear the faint sound in her ears. It was just that the melody became slow and low again, and there was no longer any trace of the murderous aura it had before. If it weren't for the lingering taste of blood between her lips and teeth, Chu Luiyue would almost think that everything just now was just an illusion. This wall is very strange. We should be careful. Chuning frowned. Chu Luiyue's lips moved, but seeing his worried expression, she finally nodded. Knows. When we find Taizu, we'll leave here immediately. Just like that, they began to wait in place. Chu Luiyue distributed the stones. If there was any movement within a radius of dozens of miles, she would be able to detect it immediately. The night was dark and silent. Rong Xiu stood guard and set up a barrier around them, blocking that terrifying murderous aura outside. Chu Luiyue sat cross-legged and began to regulate her breath. Chuning, on the other hand, sat beside her and began to concentrate on his cultivation. Dumpling opened her eyes wide, crossed her arms, and stared angrily at the wall, as if she wanted to pierce through it with her eyes. What the hell was this thing that made Ayu vomit blood? If Ayu hadn't stopped her, she would have smashed this wall. Time slowly passed. In the darkness of the night, the wall stood silently between the heavens and the earth. However, for Chu Luiyue, she couldn't completely calm down, because she could still hear the sound of the zither. It was illusory and it was faintly discernible. She tried to temporarily shut off her hearing, but it was useless. The sound of the zither continued to linger in her mind, unable to be erased. Suddenly, a stone rolled to her feet. Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. She opened her eyes and looked ahead. A familiar aura was gradually approaching. That was Taizu? Chu Liyue was surprised and delighted. She immediately stood up. Sensing her actions, the rest of the people looked over. Chu Liyue suppressed the excitement in her heart and said, Taizu should be nearby. Hearing this, Chu Ning also stood up and asked happily, Really? Then can you find the specific location? Because she knew that Chu Liyue was very concerned about this matter, Chu Ning was also very happy to see that there was progress. Chu Liyue's lips curled up. I only sensed the aura of Taizu. I still need to investigate more. However, it shouldn't be too far away. As she spoke, she closed her eyes and waved her hands in front of her. Whoosh, the scattered stones around began to gather towards her quickly. And their movement also brought about subtle changes in the surrounding spatial energy. Chu Liyue's divine consciousness began to spread into the distance. Even with her eyes closed, she could still clearly see the surrounding scene. Taizu's aura was also approaching. At a certain moment, she finally determined a certain direction and opened her eyes again. However, at this moment, her expression became much more complicated. Rong Xiu narrowed his eyes as if he had already guessed something. Chu Ning was still a little puzzled. What's wrong? Did you find it? Chu Liyue nodded and frowned slightly. Chu Ning was even more confused. Since you found it, why do you still look so worried? Then, where is Senior Shengguan now? Should we go over directly? Chu Liyue pursed her lips. After a while, she exhaled softly. I'm afraid. It's a little difficult. She raised her hand and enunciated each word clearly. Taizu seems to be behind that wall. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1683. This was going to be difficult. It didn't take much thought to know that it would be extremely difficult to cross this wall. On the one hand, the wall was too tall and cultivators couldn't fly here. Even if they could fly with the help of a divine artifact, they might not succeed. Chu Liyue didn't forget that Rong Xiu had already mentioned that this wall was built to divide the two worlds. How could a wall that had existed for tens of thousands of years be so easy to cross? On the other hand, the wall stretched on endlessly. There was no end in sight to the left or the right. It was impossible to even think about going around it. Even if they were only separated by a wall from the Taizu, it wouldn't be that easy to meet them. Then this? Chu Ning instantly understood Chu Liyue's concerns and frowned. You mean we have to find a way to cross? Chu Liyue pondered for a moment. If the Taizu can cross, it'll be the same. The important thing was that this was easy to say, but it was difficult to do. Even if the Taizu were a venerable god expert, Chu Liyue couldn't guarantee that he could deal with this wall. The ground beneath their feet had once buried countless venerable gods and venerable gods. In that earth-shattering battle, the gods fell, but this wall had withstood tens of thousands of years of wind, frost, and rain. Just this point alone was enough to see many problems. In this place, people like them were no more than ants. Chu Liyue rubbed the space between his eyebrows, feeling a headache coming on. How did that spatial turbulence bring the Taizu to the other side? Forget it. Let's get in touch with the Taizu first. With that, Chu Liyue walked up to the wall again. Taizu? She called out twice, but there was no response. Chu Liyue could clearly sense that the distance between them and the Taizu was still shrinking. If she guessed correctly, the Taizu should be moving toward this wall right now. However, she didn't know if the Taizu could hear her through this wall. Chu Liyue paused for a moment and then raised her voice again. Taizu? After shouting this time, Chu Liyue took out the Longyuan sword and rhythmically knocked on the wall with the sword hilt. Just when Chu Liyue thought that this method wouldn't work, a familiar voice finally came from the other side. You're? It was the Taizu. Chu Liyue's eyes. Taizu. It's me. I can hear you. They could hear each other's voices. Shengguan Jing held the wall with one hand. Even though he was exhausted and his legs were trembling, he still couldn't suppress the joy in his heart at this moment. Originally he only had a glimmer of hope, but he didn't expect that. Are you all right? Shengguan Jing asked hurriedly. They hadn't been separated for a long time, but the god-slaying tomb was full of danger. If they were careless, they would fall into trouble. During this period of time, he had been on tenterhooks, afraid that something would happen to them. I'm fine. Rong Xiu has been with me. Furthermore, I've already found father and brought him back safely. Chu Liyue knew that he was worried, so she immediately told him everything briefly and quickly. And that person has been taken care of by us. Although the process was a little complicated, the result was good. Shangguan Yu heaved a sigh of relief and slowly sat down with the support of the wall. That's good, that's good. At this moment Chu Liwei heard that his voice was tired and weak. It seemed that the situation wasn't very good. She frowned. Taizu, how are you? The great ancestor silently exhaled a long breath and perked up. I'm fine. I just walked for a long time. I'll be fine after resting for a while. Chu Liwei was still very worried. Ever since Taizu's divine body woke up, he had never been in such a tired and weak state. Coupled with the fact that she couldn't see him with her own eyes, Chu Liwei was even more worried. Taizu, do you know of any way to cross this wall? As long as they could successfully meet up, they could leave this place first and slowly recuperate after going back. Taizu paused for a moment and smiled bitterly. I don't know. Although he had been here before and seen this wall, he really didn't know how to deal with it. He had been worried that he would be separated from Chu Liwei and the others along the way, but in the end, Chu Liwei heard the helplessness in his voice and her heart sank. If even Taizu couldn't do anything, things would be even more troublesome. Have a good rest first. We'll stay here with you. As for the way, there will definitely be a way. Chu Liwei comforted. Taizu's lips moved, but in the end, he swallowed the words in his throat. Okay. A wall with people on both sides. They fell into a cold silence. Chu Liwei crossed her arms and began to think hard. She had a feeling that there should be a way to solve this problem. I've seen this wall from afar before. It appeared in the evening and disappeared at dawn. Chu Ning suddenly said. Maybe we don't need to do anything. We just need to wait here for dawn? Chu Liwei was stunned. That's right. How could she forget about this? Chu Ning had indeed mentioned this before, but she didn't take it to heart at that time. Now that she thought about it, if this wall could really disappear after daybreak, then they would be able to meet up with the great ancestor without any effort? She looked up at the sky. The night was dark. However, there didn't seem to be much time left until dawn. She nodded. Then let's wait and see. Hearing this, Rongxiu's eyes moved slightly as he looked meaningfully at the wall. However, he quickly retracted his gaze as if nothing had happened. Since they had confirmed that Taizu was on the other side, they obviously couldn't rest. They began to wait in silence. Waiting seemed to be especially unbearable. This was especially so for Chu Liwei, because she found that as time passed, the sound of the zither that constantly echoed in her ears seemed to gradually become clearer. Even if all her attention was on Taizu, she still couldn't make the sound of the zither disappear from her ears. But fortunately that biting cold killing intent didn't appear again. Because she was afraid that Chu Ning and Rongxiu would be worried, she didn't mention this matter again. Her expression was normal as she waited for dawn with them. Finally, the thick and dark sky gradually faded from the thick layer of black, gradually turning into a dark blue. A ray of white appeared on the horizon. After that, the bright glow of the morning sun gradually dyed half of the sky into different warm colors. Chu Liwei slowly clenched her hands and looked at the wall again. The morning light sprinkled down gently, revealing a heavy and ancient aura. Chu Liwei's heart gradually sank to the bottom of the valley. It didn't disappear. It didn't move. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1684. A chill suddenly rose from the soles of her feet and went straight to the top of her head. The cold air enveloped Chu Liu's entire body. The mottled black wall became clearer under the sunlight. Chu Ning was also shocked. How could this be? It was clear that this wall would disappear after daybreak. Today, it seems that I have to think of another way. Chu Liwei pondered for a moment and finally chose to accept reality. Although she didn't know why the wall didn't disappear, she vaguely felt that it seemed to have something to do with the sound of the zither she heard. But now she didn't have any evidence, so it was naturally hard to say. Chu Liwei took a step forward. Taizu, are you okay? Sheng Guanjing also didn't sleep for the whole night. However, after a night of recuperation, his body had almost recovered, and his voice sounded much more robust. I'm fine. Don't worry. Chu Liwei thought for a moment and asked, Taizu, what if we go out separately and meet outside the god-slaying tomb? Sheng Guanjing sighed. How could he not know what Chu Liwei meant by asking this question? It was too difficult to cross the wall and meet her. It would be good if they could meet outside. But the key was, there are countless entrances and exits in the god-slaying tomb. And there are countless void turbulences in the middle. If you are careless, you will lose your way. Back then, I went directly to the northern region of the primordial world. If we go out separately, I'm afraid that it would take a lot of effort. Chu Liyue's head hurt even more. What Taizu said was what she was most worried about. The god-slaying tomb was too big. It was impossible to fly in the vast wilderness. Once they were separated, it would take a lot of time and energy to find each other. The sound of the zither in her mind seemed to be closer and lingered around, making Chu Liyue more and more anxious. Bang! She gritted her teeth and punched the wall. What exactly, boss? A slight fluctuation suddenly came from his dantian. Chu Liyue was startled for a moment, then immediately became spirited. This movement was the water droplet. Rong Xiu narrowed his eyes when he noticed the change in her expression. What's wrong? Chu Liyue shook his head and tried to punch the wall again. Another wave of energy came. The most subtle thing was that this time Chu Liyue used a little more force, and the movement of the water droplet seemed to be a little stronger than the first time. This is... Chu Liyue looked at the wall curiously. His eyes were completely different from before. She finally knew where that faintly discernible sense of familiarity came from. Wasn't that solemn, dignified, and lofty aura extremely similar to the water droplet in her dantian? However, after she became a high god, the water droplet kept a low profile and stayed quietly in her body. That was why she didn't think of it for a while. But thinking back to the past, she was often picked on by the water droplet. Chu Liyue's eyes were filled with suspicion. Could it be that the water droplet in her body had something to do with this wall? If that was the case, did it mean that she could find a way to cross this wall and successfully meet up with the Taizu? Just as this thought flashed through her mind, a harsh voice suddenly came from behind her. Uncle Luo Yan, it's them. They're really haunting me. Chu Liyue rubbed the space between his eyebrows and slowly turned around. As expected, he saw a few familiar faces. The one who spoke just now was Nanny. Different from the timid and aggrieved appearance before, Nanny's eyes were arrogant and her expression was arrogant. From top to bottom, there was no longer any fear from before. At this moment, she was standing beside a middle-aged man and pointing at Chu Liyue. It's her. She's the one who reduced us to such a state. Uncle Luo Yan, you must avenge ye. Chu Liyue raised his eyebrows and smiled. No wonder she suddenly became so presumptuous. It turned out that she had asked for reinforcements. She turned her gaze slightly and looked at the man called Uncle Luo Yan by Nanny. That man looked to be in his 30s. He was tall and burly with wheat-colored skin, sharp eyebrows and starry eyes. He could be considered handsome. But what was more eye-catching was the shocking aura around him. Although the other party hadn't made a move yet, Chu Liyue had already quickly determined the other party's realm. He was definitely a venerable god expert. And he was the kind with extremely strong combat strength. The number of venerable god experts she had seen in her life could be counted on one hand, but she had a deep impression of every one of them. This kind of person's aura was completely different from that of a venerable doctor or a venerable weapon refiner. As long as he stood there, he didn't need to do anything and he already had enough deterrence. No wonder Nanny was suddenly so confident. While Chu Liyue was sizing up Luo Yan was also sizing her up. After looking around, a trace of surprise flashed across his eyes. Because he was actually unable to detect this woman's true realm. The other party's strength was obviously inferior to his. He was a venerable god expert and was famous for his eyesight. Generally speaking, as long as he glanced at the other party, he could easily see through the other party's background. But this woman, he couldn't see through her. The only explanation was that she had an extraordinary divine artifact on her that was specially used to conceal her aura. Even he couldn't see through it. It seemed that he still couldn't underestimate them. Luo Yan's mind raced, but his expression was very calm. He put one hand behind his back and took a step forward. Were you the one who caused these injuries? His tone was calm, but there was no anger in it, and there was a sense of superiority in it. It was a simple sentence, but when it came out of his mouth, it was like a question. Before Chu Liyue could speak, Rong Xiu had already walked in front of her. You haven't even introduced yourself, yet you're questioning my princess consort. Is this the rule of your Nan family? Luo Yan frowned. You're the holy son of Yintian Tower, Rong Xiu? Rong Xiu's thin lips curved slightly, and there was a faint smile on his face. Before coming here they should have already said a lot about us. Don't you think it's unnecessary to ask this question now? Luo Yan slowly clenched his fists. On the way here he had indeed heard a few people talk about what had happened before. At first he thought that they were exaggerating, but now it seemed that Rong Xiu was indeed as arrogant as they said. He knew that he was here to collect a debt, but he was still so righteous and even tit for tat. Luo Yan smiled, but it was obvious that he didn't take Rongxiu seriously. Rongxiu, I can understand that you're young and frivolous. But it's not a good thing to be too arrogant. Today, I'm here to seek an explanation for Yi. This matter has nothing to do with you, so I advise you to step aside. In other words, he was here to make trouble for Chu Luiyue. Rongxiu also smiled, but there seemed to be a layer of frost between his eyebrows, and there was a biting cold air. What if I say no? Mobile users, please browse for a more high-quality reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1685. As soon as he finished speaking, the atmosphere froze. The smile on Luo Yan's face faded. Rongxiu, I know that you have been quite famous in the Divine Ruins world all these years. But there is always someone better than you. Don't tell me you don't know that? This sovereign is only giving you this face because you are indeed someone important. Don't go too far. Rongxiu's smile deepened as if he had heard a joke. You want to touch Ai's princess consort, and you even asked me not to interfere. Luo Yan, don't you think it's ridiculous? This sentence made the last trace of smile on Luo Yan's face disappear completely. His expression became cold and solemn, and a heavy pressure spread out from his body. Do you really want to be enemies with me? Rongxiu smiled but didn't say anything, as if he was too lazy to answer this question. Such an attitude was undoubtedly the most direct provocation to Luo Yan. You, Uncle Luo Yan. Seeing that he was about to fly into a rage, Nanny hurriedly grabbed his arm. Uncle Luo Yan, didn't you come this time to avenge me? Don't target the wrong person. Didn't I already say that all the conflicts and problems were caused by that Sheng Wanyu? Luo Yan looked at her thoughtfully. Nanny looked away guiltily. Nan Yuxing and the others standing behind couldn't help but look at each other with complicated expressions. Actually, Rongxiu is clearly the one who should be punished if we pursue this matter. But after Nan Yi invited Luo Yan over, she pushed most of the blame to Sheng Wanyu. At this point, how could they not understand Nan Yi's thoughts? But now that things had come to this, they couldn't say anything. Luo Yan had always doted on Nan Yi, and he believed almost everything she said. Wouldn't they be adding to the trouble if they went up to say these things? Thus, they could only choose to remain silent. Seeing their reaction, Luo Yan could guess what was going on. Although he doted on Nan Yi, it didn't mean that he was brainless. Although he was a little surprised, he had never seen Nan Yi so protective of anyone. His intentions were as clear as day. Luo Yan frowned. Nan Yi had long reached the age of marriage, but she had never been interested in these things. It was rare for her to fall in love with someone, but that person just had to be Rongxiu. His identity was still acceptable, but who in the Divine Ruins realm didn't know that Rongxiu had already personally chosen a princess and set up a marriage contract? If word of this got out, her reputation. Luo Yan wanted to say something to her, but when he saw how guilty Nanny looked, his heart ached for her and he couldn't bring himself to say the words that were at the tip of his tongue. No matter what, the child had grown up and he still had to give her some face outside. These words. It wouldn't be too late to say them when we get back. But now he had to solve the problem at hand. Thinking of this, his eyes darkened as he looked at Chu Luiyue. Danger. Chu Luiyue immediately became alert the moment his gaze swept over. His entire body tensed up. Even if the other party didn't say anything, she still keenly sensed the other party's killing intent. This was an extremely sensitive sixth sense that she had developed after experiencing countless life and death situations. Chu Luiyue's brows moved slightly as countless guesses and thoughts flashed through her mind. This Luo Yan seemed to be targeting her? Just because she bullied Nanny? She heard what he said very clearly just now. He seemed to be here only for Nanny and didn't include the others at all. From the beginning to the end, he really only had Nanny in his eyes and heart. Strange, there was no need to talk about the two elders. Wasn't that Nan Yuxing the eldest young master of the Nan family and Nanny's biological brother? He was injured more seriously than Nanny, but why did it seem like Luo Yan didn't care at all? Wasn't such favoritism a little too much? Actually, Chu Luiyue didn't know that Luo Yan was famous for doting on Nanny. Who in the Nan family didn't know that offending Nanny was equivalent to offending Luo Yan? Although Nan Yifan doted on her a lot, there were still times when he was strict with her. But Luo Yan wasn't like that. Since young, as long as Nanny asked, he would try his best to satisfy any request. Even if Nanny was arrogant and willful and had caused a lot of trouble in the past, he had never said anything harsh to her. However, Luo Yan was powerful and had a very noble status in the Nan family. Most people couldn't do anything to him. Speaking of which, A large part of the reason why Nanny had developed her current personality was because of Luo Yen. But Luo Yen never felt that there was anything wrong with it and still agreed to Nanny's requests. Even if this time, Nan Yifan had already informed him in advance that he wasn't allowed to come and help on his own. After receiving Nanny's news, he immediately rushed over. However, considering that he had to give Nan Yifan some face, Luo Yen indeed only intended to help Nanny vent her anger and leave the rest to them. Yi's request is very simple. As long as you come out and experience all the pain she suffered before and apologize to her, this matter will be considered over. Luo Yen said indifferently. Hearing this, Chu Liwei almost thought that she had heard wrongly. She blinked and laughed out loud. What? Luo Yan's eyes were cold. Since you heard it, do as I say. My time is limited. Chu Liwei had always thought that she was arrogant. But today she had broadened her horizons. Along the way, these people were clearly the ones who kept pestering them and finding trouble with them. Now that things had come to this, they actually felt that they had been wronged. She was already impatient with them, and with the matter of the great ancestor, she was still uneasy. Hearing this now was undoubtedly adding fuel to the fire. But the angrier she was, the more rational she became. She took a step forward and walked to Rong Xiu's side. Then she reached out and hugged Rong Xiu's arm. Rong Xiu immediately held her hand and intertwined their fingers. Chu Liwei smiled slightly and asked, I admit that some of her injuries are indeed related to me, but aren't you curious why I treated her like this? Luo Yen frowned. Chu Liwei blinked and slowly said, That's right. She snatched my man right in front of me. She even did such a shameless thing. Can't I hit her? Nanny's face instantly turned pale and then flushed red. Shangguan Yu? She really didn't expect Chu Liwei to be so straightforward and unpleasant. She had never been humiliated like this since she was young. Luo Yan's expression also changed. Nanny hurriedly glanced at him and quickly explained. Uncle Luo Yan, don't listen to her nonsense. She's the one who slandered me. It's not impossible for me to apologize. But before that, second Miss Nan, please apologize to me first. How about that? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from love. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.